Chapter 455. Royal Formation Mountain, the headquarters of the Xian sect. The leader of the Lai Xian clan was a junior of the human race on the E-Cliff. However, this person only focused on cultivating and comprehending the Tao. He never cared about the affairs of the clan. Therefore, all the mundane affairs were handled by the 9 elders. At this moment, there were 6 Yuanying elders sitting in the hall. The great elder, old Ram Sheng, sat at the head of the altar. He looked to be in his 80s, with white hair and a youthful complexion. He wore a deep purple robe of auspicious crane soaring through the clouds, a crown on his head, and a rui branch in his hand. His eyes glowed, and he had an awe-inspiring aura. After a while, he said slowly, "Junior apprentice brother Sha is not here yet?" A blue-robed Taoist on the right stood up and bowed, saying, "Uncle Master Sha said that he will arrive at the latest at 9 o'clock. There's still a quarter of an hour left, why don't Uncle Master wait a little longer?" "All right, we'll do as Martial Nephew Rui says. Let's wait a little longer." Gong Yangsheng readily accepted the advice and said with a smile. However, there were people below who were dissatisfied and said, "May I know why Martial Uncle has gathered us? If it's not something important, why don't you say it earlier so that we don't have to waste time here?" The person who spoke was a young man. His hair was tied into a bun, and he wore short-sleeved casual clothes with a colorful silk robe draped over him. There was an exquisite jade pendant hanging from his waist, and he wore dark-colored cloud boots. He held a 7-star magic sword in his hand, and he pressed it against his knees. His eyes were filled with an indescribable sharp light. The Lai Xian order had a total of 8 branch altars. Normally, each Yuanying cultivator would oversee an area. This person was called Yi Jiliu, and he was the altar master of the wave-shaking altar. Apart from the great elder, Gong Yangsheng, his cultivation could be considered outstanding here. Gong Yangsheng's self-restraint was very good. His martial nephew spoke so rudely. He didn't get angry and only said, "Martial nephew, don't be anxious. When everyone is here, I will speak." After waiting for another moment, when Yi Jiliu felt that his patience had reached its limit, a beam of light flew in from outside the hall and landed in the hall. It was a sloppy Taoist. His clothes were tattered and his face was covered in dust. His toes were exposed through the holes in his boots. However, the enlightened masters were already used to this. One of them complained, "Uncle Sha, we have to wait for you every time." Taoist Sha laughed and bowed to the 6 Zenrins, saying, "I'm late by a step, please forgive me, please forgive me." He then casually bowed to Gong Yangsheng and called him Shi Xiang. That was it. "Since junior martial brother is here, please take your seat. I still have something to say." "I'm afraid martial nephew you can't wait any longer." Taoist Sha hastily went to his seat, then smiled and cupped his fists at a fellow disciple sitting next to him. Only then did he sit down. But after he sat down, he was restless. He took off his old boots, sniffed them, threw them aside, and began to rub his feet. Immediately, a strange smell wafted out. Yi Jiliu happened to be right below him. He could not help but reveal a hint of disgust on his face. He turned his body to the side and cast a spell to seal his nose aperture. The Sand Taoist suddenly turned around. Giving him a mischievous smile, Yi Jiliu could not help but snort. At this time, the voice of Ram Sheng came from the high platform. "A few days ago, there was a piece of news from the Double Moon Peak." Taoist Sand couldn't help but stop his movements and reveal an attentive expression. Twin Moon Peak was the most important place of Zhenluo Union. If there was news from there, it would definitely be very important. He then heard Ram Sheng continue, "I heard that the person who stole our sect's divine object is a heavenly demon. He's currently on the Double Moon Peak." Yi Jiliu's eyes turned cold. "Are you referring to Priest Zhang who killed senior brother Gua and senior brother Pang?" "Yes, it is him," Gong Yangsheng sighed. Upon hearing that it was this person, everyone's expressions turned solemn. Yi Jiliu snorted a few times and glanced at Taoist Sha and the other 2 Taoists before saying, "Junior Uncle Sha, Junior Sister Tan, Junior Brother Gao, do you have anything to say?" Junior brother Gao was a handsome man wearing a silver robe and a tall crown. Junior sister Tan looked like she was in her 30s. She had a well-developed figure and wore light makeup. They and Taoist Sha were the three people who were originally stationed in Pingxi. After learning that Guo and senior brother Pang were killed, they only thought about protecting themselves and did not do anything. Hearing Yi Jiliu's slightly sarcastic words, Taoist Sha remained calm. Tan and Gao, on the other hand, revealed an unnatural expression. After all, they did not do anything when their fellow disciples were killed. Even if they had a good reason, it was not something to be proud of. Seeing that the two of them were embarrassed, the blue-robed Taoist hurriedly tried to smooth things over. That day, senior Uncle Sha and the others had no other choice. Kunyu is protected by a great formation. If no one led the way, it would not have been possible to break through in a day or two. Moreover, the branch altars cannot be left so easily. They were thinking of the bigger picture. Junior brother Yi, please don't blame them. Yi Jiliu did not continue to argue. He raised the magic sword in his hand and said with a murderous tone, I heard that Taoist Zhang's Dao technique is strange. I've long wanted to meet him. Senior Uncle Gong Yang, are you sending us to kill this person? Junior brother Tan suddenly said, Senior Uncle Gong Yang, the Twin Moon Peak can be considered the headquarters of the Zhenluo Alliance. In terms of strength, this alliance is actually far above our sect. It's only because of internal discord that our sect managed to take advantage of this loophole. However, if we go to that place, we must be cautious. His words immediately attracted the agreement of the others. Taoist Sha also nodded repeatedly. Yi Jiliu sneered and said, Are you all afraid? It's all right. I, Yi Jiliu, am willing to go alone and cut off this person's head. I'll enshrine it in front of the ancestral god statue. Let's see if someone is embarrassed then. At the end of his words, he cast a glance at Taoist Sha's face. Taoist Sha was an extremely thick-skinned person. He chuckled and only treated Yi Jiliu's words as a gentle breeze. Gong Yangxing praised, Junior brother Ye's courage is commendable. This person must be killed. However, the reason why I called everyone here today is not just for this person. It's for the divine beast's egg. This item concerns the fate of our sect for thousands of years. No matter what, we must find a way to take it back. Junior sister Tan's eyes flickered as she asked, Senior uncle, is this item really in this person's hands? To the left of Gong Yangsheng, there was a bald Daoran with a chin like a spoon and a face with brown stripes. He answered, Junior sister Tan, this person has not returned to the East Flower Continent. Other than the Twin Moon Peak, he has not been to any other place. The divine beast's egg should still be in his hands. This bald Doran's words seemed to be very authoritative. After hearing it, Junior sister Tan nodded and said no more. Yi Jiliu's sharp eyes stared at Gong Yangxing again. Martial uncle, I'm willing to make a trip to the Twin Moon's Peak to retrieve the divine beast's egg for our divine church. However, I also know that I'm afraid that I can't do it alone. Martial uncle, please send another person to accompany me. That way, I'll be more confident. Gong Yangxing let out a laugh that shook the hall. However, his words were shocking. This trip to the Twin Moon Peak is not a matter of 1 or 2 people. The 7 of us must go together. Only then will we have the highest chance of success. As soon as these words came out, there was a burst of exclamation. The blue-robed Taoist opened his hands and asked in surprise, Senior uncle, if we all go to the Twin Moon Peak, who will guard the headquarters? Gong Yangxing smiled and said, this is not difficult. We can make arrangements in advance and create the illusion that we are all in the headquarters to confuse the Qingshi Temple and the Jinling sect. With the help of the ancestral statue and the tactical formation, even if there is a large-scale attack, it will not be broken in 10 days. Besides, with the help of the golden bridge of our sect, we can travel thousands of miles in an instant. After we kill this person together, we can return to the headquarters in time. If everything goes well, I'm afraid that the disciples of the 2 sects will not be aware of it and we will return. The blue-robed Taoist murmured, 7 people, 7 people, that is the full strength of our Lai Xian sect. Gong Yangxing squinted and corrected, Junior Brother Chu, you have missed 1 person. The blue-robed Taoist was stunned for a moment, then he patted his forehead and said, yes, yes, how could I have missed him? Junior Sister Tan thought for a moment and said, Senior Uncle, it's not that I want to say too much, but with 8 people against 1 person, although it is foolproof, is it making a fuss? Gong Yangsheng looked serious and said, even a lion will use its full strength to catch a rabbit. That Taoist Zhang can kill the 2 junior nephews Gua and Pang, which means that his magical power is extremely powerful and must not be underestimated. Moreover, after we get the divine beast egg, our sect will prosper greatly. How can you say that it is making a fuss? Yi Jiliu was excited and said, then what are we waiting for? Senior Uncle, when do we start? I am willing to take the lead. At this time, the bald Daoran slowly said, Junior Brother Yi, don't be impatient. Today, Senior Uncle Gong Yang only summoned you to discuss this matter. This matter still needs to be carefully arranged. In my opinion, 3 or 4 years should be enough. What? 3 or 4 years? When Yi Jiliu heard this, his eyebrows trembled and he couldn't help but jump up, that person ran away long ago. Gong Yangshin pressed his hand down and said, Junior Nephew Yi, sit down and let's talk. Don't worry. That Taoist Zhang is currently refining a treasure on Twin Moon Peak. Rumor has it that this treasure is made by Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan together, and they also bought a lot of precious materials. I have already asked the refining experts in the sect, and they said that it is not something that can be completed in a hurry in 3 to 5 years, so there is no need to be impatient. Yi Jiliu thought for a moment, then let out a heh and sat down resentfully. The blue-robed Taoist was not so optimistic. He carefully calculated for a while and looked at the bald Daoran, saying, 3 to 4 years of arrangement, Senior Brother who is actually still not enough. What kind of place is Twin Moon Peak? It is not a place that we can go just because we want to. If we are not careful, the 13 elders of Zhenluo League will come together, and with the help of the formation of Twin Moon Peak, they can definitely kill all of us. Taoist Sha suddenly said, Senior Brother, you seem to have forgotten someone. Gong Yangsheng looked over and asked in a deep voice, who? Taoist Sha said lightly, Cheng Ru, Spiritual Master Cheng. As soon as this name was said, a few people's expressions changed. Cheng Ru was the name of the spiritual master behind Zhenluo League. Although she had not shown herself for a long time, as long as she was in Zhenluo League, they would never be able to leave Twin Moon Peak safely. Gong Yangxing smiled and said, Junior Brother's concern is reasonable. Taoist Sha's expression changed, and he asked in surprise, could it be that Senior Brother has already made arrangements? Gong Yangsheng looked at everyone's faces, and suddenly raised his hand to salute, saying, everyone, don't worry. I have already asked that person to come out, and this spiritual master Cheng will definitely not come out to stop our sect's people. That person? Everyone immediately realized who Gong Yangsheng was talking about. While fear appeared in their eyes, their hearts also calmed down. Taoist Sha smiled bitterly and said, since that person is willing to come out, that is for the best. However, I am afraid that the offerings that our sect will send will increase again. Chapter 456. Ever since the heavenly furnace was sealed, the black tortoise's metamorphosis was slowly nurtured inside. Zhang Yan didn't have to spend too much energy for now. During the day, he would refine Gangying in the Feiyu Daoist Palace, and at night, he would come to the earthly fire heavenly furnace to guard and deduce the 5 elements escape technique. He would go back and forth between these 2 places every day. After 3 months, Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan came to see him together. After exchanging greetings, Liang Changgong first said, Jinren Zhang, in 5 months, we will open the furnace for the 2nd time. But this time, it's a little different. Not only do we need to draw in the earth qi, but we also need to change the earth fire to open fire. However, the wood used as firewood is somewhat particular. It's divided into 6 grades, and the higher the grade, the purer the fire. I'm here to ask Shinran Zhang, what should we use? Zhang Yan raised his brows and said, I've already said that I'll naturally choose the best materials. Why do you have to ask me again, fellow Taoist Liang? Liang Changgong hesitated for a while and finally said, to be honest, this treasure needs at least 4 years of sacrificial refining, which means at least 24 azure wood will be used. However, this wood is too rare, and the number of spirit shells needed is not small. Because the two of us have filled in a lot of precious materials, we've already used up a lot of our savings. If we want to buy this wood again, it's a little difficult, so, Zhang Yan raised his head and glanced at the two of them. Wei Shudan couldn't help but avoid his gaze, and Liang Changgong lowered his head. He was surprised. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan weren't scholars. Even if spirit shells were not enough, they should have told him long ago. Why did this suddenly pop up now? He wouldn't believe that there was nothing strange behind this. However, he wasn't in the mood to care about the details. As long as the treasure was successfully refined, spirit shells were nothing. His expression was indifferent, and he asked, how many spirit shells do I need? Liang Changgong opened his thumb and food, carefully counting, and said, if it's that azure wood, then it'll need 80,000 spirit shells. After a pause, he added, I've discussed with Wei Shudan, and we think that if Jinren feels that it's not enough, we can use other things instead. 80,000 spirit shells was not a small number even in the Central Pillar continent. Zhang Yan didn't even frown. He tossed out a sleeve and said, there are 100,000 spirit shells in here. Use them first. If it's not enough, come back to me. Liang Changgong couldn't help but be startled. Then, there was no joy on his face. Instead, his face turned pale. He took the sleeve bag and opened it. He saw that the spirit shells inside were all high-grade. If he exchanged them for low-grade spirit shells, it would be enough to trade for 3. Not only would it be enough to buy the azure wood, but it would also be enough to buy the treasures from before. He trembled slightly and forced himself to calm down. He stood up and bowed. Then we'll take our leave first. Zhang Yan didn't stand up. He returned the salute and said, I won't be sending you off. When the two of them walked out, Liang Changgong let out a sigh and grumbled, Brother Wei, look, I've told you this method won't work. Taoist Zhang is from a big sect, so how can he not take out several tens of thousands of spirit shells? Now that we have the spirit shells, we don't know where to find the azure wood. Wei Shudan stroked his beard and smiled bitterly. It's my fault this time. I thought that by saying this, Taoist Zhang would be able to use other things to replace the spirit shells. I didn't expect Taoist Zhang to be so wealthy. It's hard for me to talk about the inside story now. Liang Changgong angrily said, if that person didn't buy all the azure wood I had my eyes on, we wouldn't be in such a predicament. How hateful. Every single one of these azure trees had a lifespan of 30,000 years. Only the Middle Pillar continent could grow to such an age. If it was any other place, it would have been chopped down and refined into a transcendent treasure before it could fully mature. But even so, it was extremely rare and difficult to find. The azure wood that Liang Changgong had his eyes on was a treasure of someone else. They had already agreed on it, but a few days ago, when he excitedly ran over, he said that it had been taken away by someone else. This was tantamount to a blow to his head. If he failed to refine the treasure, it would be hard for him to explain to Zhang Yan. Wei Shudan frowned and thought for a moment. There's still some time left. I'll go somewhere else to think of a way to see if I can find this wood. Even if I can find 6 of them, it'll be enough for a year. I'll slowly look for them later. What do you think? Liang Changgong's face was full of worry. What if I still can't find it by then? Wei Shudan didn't know how to answer and sighed. I'll drag it out for as long as I can. He didn't say anything else and just bowed to him. Then, he flew up into the clouds and disappeared in a moment. Liang Changgong sighed and also returned to his residence. However, the two of them thought that they had covered up this matter. They did not know that Zhang Yan had already seen some clues from their words and expressions. Hence, he paid special attention to the words that the two of them said when they left the mansion. Everything that they said when they left the mansion was transmitted into his ears. He thought for a moment and already had a plan. He called the Taoist boy outside the door and said, "That day, I met Taoist Hua from the Golden Soaring sect and felt that we were on good terms. We agreed to visit another day. May I know where he is now?" The Taoist boy didn't suspect anything and said, "Taoist Hua lives in the East Court. The side palace is not far from here. Do you need me to bring you there?" Zhang Yan smiled. "It's just a few steps away. I don't need you to accompany me. Go ahead." After dismissing the Taoist boy, he waved his sleeves and left the palace. He turned into a golden light and flew towards the East Court. In a flash, he landed in front of the side palace. The disciple guarding the door wasn't from the Tao Palace but from the Golden Soaring sect. When he saw Zhang Yan, he thought that he was an elder from the Zhenluo League. He bowed and said, "May I know which elder is here? I'll go and report it." Zhang Yan said, "I, Zhang Yan, would like to see Taoist Hua." The disciple couldn't help but look surprised. Obviously, he had heard of Zhang Yan's reputation. He hurriedly bowed to him and hurriedly went inside. After a while, the middle door opened and a haggard-looking Daoran with sparse hair and beard walked out. Judging from his aura, his cultivation was only at the core transformation realm. The person saw Zhang Yan and hurriedly took 2 steps forward. He bowed and said, "It really is Jinren Zhang. Hua Xiaofang greets you. Please come inside." Zhang Yan didn't stand on ceremony. He nodded and walked inside. When they reached the hall, Hua Xiaofang first invited Zhang Yan to sit down. Then, he sat down and said, "May I know why Jinren is here?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Taoist Hua, why do you ask when you already know the answer? I'm here for the 10,000-year-old verdant wood." Hua Xiaofang was slightly startled. Then, he smiled and said, "Did Taoist Wei and Taoist Liang say that Jinren knows about it?" Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He said, "That verdant would just happen to be used by I, and it was bought by someone else." The timing was so ingenious. This is definitely not the act of a layman. Taoist Liang and Taoist Wei are not low in the league. Other than Taoist Hua from the Golden Soaring sect, I really can't think of anyone else who can make them so wary. Hua Xiaofang revealed a look of surprise. Then, he lowered his head and thought for a while. Then, he slowly raised his head and said, "Jinren, please allow me to report. There's another story behind this. I didn't mean to make things difficult for Jinren." Zhang Yan looked at him and waited for him to continue. Hua Xiaofang sighed and said, "To be honest, Jinren Zhang, Daoran only has 20 years left to live. It's just that I've been obsessed with the art of refining and have always wanted to compile a treasure record of refining weapons. However, due to the rules of the sect, I've only been working behind closed doors. I've never sparred with my fellow Taoists here. Today, I heard that Taoist Liang and Taoist Wei were refining treasures. Just from the treasures alone, I can tell that they're not ordinary items. Thus, I was excited and wanted to come here to observe. However, I was afraid that the 2 Taoists wouldn't allow me, so I came up with this plan. I really don't want to make things difficult for Jinren." He stood up and bowed solemnly. He said, "I've sinned, please forgive me, Jinren." Feiyu Taoist Palace Che Yi put down the letter and fell into deep thought. Ever since the deaths of Guo and Pang, the Lai Xian sect had always been on the defensive in Pingxi. However, in recent days, they've been acting unusually. They've been sending out disciples to invade the Zhenluo Union's territory. There were even a few elders in the sect, but no one knew what they were up to. This letter came from his good friend, Elder Yao. It mentioned that at least 3 Jinren from the Lai Xian sect had attacked the place where he was stationed. Elder Che shook his head. Actually, he had already advised his good friend to return to the Twin Moon Peak. Although the land outside the mountain was vast, there were only nomadic settlements and barbarians living there. The population was not more than 10,000. Even if they were all thrown to the Lai Xian sect, it wouldn't hurt their foundation. Moreover, the Lai Xian sect in Pingdong was hindered by Qingshi Temple and Jinling sect. After a long time, they would definitely retreat. There was no need to fight to the death with them. Although there were 13 Yuanying elders in the Zhenluo Union, they came from different backgrounds and joined the union at different times. Generally speaking, as long as it didn't involve their own family, they would just pretend and not put in much effort. However, this elder Yao and Che Yi were not only from the same hometown, but they had entered the mountain together when they were young to seek Tao. Their friendship of nearly 1,000 years was extraordinary. How could he sit back and ignore this person's letter? After thinking about it, he decided to go back. Che Yi thought, even if Daoren leaves, it should be enough with Brother Huang and Brother Shang guarding this place. After making his decision, he ordered the Daoist boy to invite Huang Zuoguang and Shang Ting over. Not long after, the two of them came to the hall. Che Yi didn't beat around the bush and told them about his plan to help. Huang Zuoguang had no objections. Unexpectedly, Shang Ting, who had always been conservative, didn't object to this matter either. Che Yi unconsciously relaxed a little and cupped his hands. After Daoren, I'll have to trouble the two of you to take care of the Twin Moon Peak. Huang Zuoguang said heroically, Elder Che, take care. With the two of us here, we will definitely be safe. Shang Ting suddenly asked, when will Brother Che return? Che Yi stroked his beard and said, that depends on when the Lai Xian sect retreats. Shang Ting nodded and cupped his hands, before Elder returns, we will not let anything happen to the Twin Moon Peak. Che Yi said with relief, after Daoren leaves, there will be one less person guarding the Twin Moon Peak. However, since that fellow Zhang borrowed our Earthfire Heavenly Cauldron, we might as well ask him to help if we encounter any difficulties. I don't think he will refuse. The two of them nodded. After giving his instructions, Che Yi adjusted himself slightly before standing up and flying out of the palace on a gust of strong wind. After he left, Shang Teng and Huang Zuoguang bowed and returned to their cultivation residence expressionlessly. Then, they took out a letter that they had prepared long ago from their sleeves and threw it into the air. It disappeared in an instant. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 457. The incense array covers the stars, and the net is changed by the wind. Liang Changgong had been looking for the azure wood for the past few days, and someone had given him 2 of them. However, this was only a drop in the bucket, and he still had to accept the favor. Look. Just as he was worrying about this, Hua Zhaofang came to visit and brought the 24 azure wood to his mansion. She explained the whole story and said, I didn't do well in this matter, and I'm ashamed. Fortunately, Master Zhang didn't argue with Daoren. As a token of my apology, I'll put the cost of refining the treasure on Daoren. However, I hope that the 2 of you can allow Daoren to observe from the side when you're refining the treasure. Liang Changgong didn't think that Hua Zhaofang had this purpose, and he couldn't help but hesitate. After all, the other party was an expert in this field. Although she wouldn't be able to learn the secret, she would be able to see a lot of things. He said awkwardly, I can't make this decision alone, and I need to discuss it with fellow Wei. Hua Zhaofang could also guess what Liang Changgong was thinking, so she said seriously, fellow Liang doesn't need to worry, I definitely don't have any ulterior motives. If allowed, I'm willing to make a vow that I won't reveal what I've seen or heard. What do you think? Liang Changgong was a bit surprised, but this was easy to say. He pondered for a long time, then nodded and ordered a servant to invite Wei Shudan over. The north and south moon peaks were close, and Wei Shudan arrived in a moment. When he entered the mansion, he was surprised to see Hua Zhaofang here. After listening to Liang Changgong's explanation, he finally understood. He thought for a moment and finally said, in my opinion, I can agree to this. I can agree to this, but there is one thing I hope fellow Daoist Hua can agree to. Hua Xiaofang's face lit up, and she said, please say it. Wei Shudan first looked at Liang Changgong, then cupped his hands at Hua Xiaofang, and said in a deep voice, Your Honorable Sir's treasure record of weapon refining needs to be added with our names. Liang Changgong was startled, then his body trembled, and his heart palpitated. He had no hope of reaching the great Tao, but he had some achievements in the path of forging weapons. But once he passed away, everything would disappear like the wind and clouds. However, if one wrote a book and left it in the world, it would leave one's name in history. It could also benefit countless descendants. Even if one reincarnated and cultivated again, their chances of entering the Tao again would be much better than ordinary people. Wei Shudan's calculations were extremely good. Even if the secret technique of the two of them was learned by him, with this book left behind, he would not be able to escape. In fact, the benefits were even greater. Hua Xiaofang frowned, a little hesitant. For this precious record, he had labored for more than 100 years. These two only needed to open their mouths. He didn't even need to spend any effort, yet he was about to bask in the limelight. This really made him feel a little unwilling. However, he had a favor to ask for, so how could he not pay a price? He could take the verdant azure wood back, but that would be the end of both sides. Zhang Yan might not be as easy to talk to as last time. Thinking about his lifelong wish, he sighed and cast aside his selfishness. He said in a deep voice, Fine. I promise the two of you that I will write down your names on the place where the author wrote the book. Wei Shudan and Liang Changgong exchanged glances with one another. Both of them smiled. They finally let go of this matter and didn't need to toss and turn in bed like before, unable to sleep. After sending Hua Xiaofang away, Wei Shudan suddenly sighed, Brother Liang, this time Zhang Jinren didn't expose the two of us for lying to him, he really took care of our face. Liang Changgong retracted his smile and kept silent for a moment. He said, I am not someone who doesn't know what is good for me, so I can only take out my entire life's skills to repay him. Wei Shudan nodded his head silently. After the two of them returned to the manor, they rejected all matters and then went to the side of the giant pit to build a hut and wait for the furnace to be opened. After Hua Xiaofang heard about it, he also came over to find a chance to discuss the path of artifact crafting with the two of them. The three of them could be called masters of this path, it was just that the path they inherited was different. As they talked, they each had their own understanding. Just like that, 5 months passed peacefully. When it was the beginning of autumn, the wind was chilly, the grass and trees were green, and the river was crossing the cold boat. It was already the day to open the furnace again. At 7 in the morning, Zhang Yan's robe fluttered as he rode the wind from the Tao Palace. He landed in front of the heavenly furnace and met up with the three of them again. After exchanging greetings, Liang Changgong spoke first, Zhang Jinren, this time the artifact crafting needs to be done in one go. According to my and Brother Wei's calculations, it should take 4 years. However, the flow of the earth qi outside cannot be made, otherwise, the meridians of the earth qi will be muddled and all the previous efforts will be wasted. I will have to trouble Jinren for this. The flow of earth qi in the giant pit was divided into clear and turbid. If one used a secret technique to guide and refine it, there would be miraculous effects. However, as time passed, it was inevitable that the qi would dissipate, and the clear and turbid would flow together, mixing into a mess. At this time, someone would need to go forward and reorganize the chaos. The higher the cultivation of the person doing this, the easier it would be. Zhang Yan was the owner of the artifact in the furnace, and he himself was a Yuanian cultivator. For him to do this, there was no one more suitable than him. He also knew the crux of the matter, so he said with a smile, "This is I's matter, how can it be troublesome?" Wei Shudan cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang, there is one more thing. This time the artifact crafting will cause a huge commotion. In order to prevent thieves from causing trouble, I have already borrowed hundreds of strong men from the League to set up guard formations on all the mountains within a radius of 300 miles. If an enemy really comes, we will be able to detect it in advance. Even though it was necessary to take precautions before the artifact crafting, the Twin Moon Peak was the base of the Zhenluo League, and it was covered with restrictive formations. In his heart, he did not think that there would really be a great enemy attacking. He just wanted to use this to show how important this matter was to him. Zhang Yan nodded. This artifact was originally crafted for him, so of course, he would not allow others to come and cause trouble. He said, as for the matters outside, there is naturally I to take care of it. You two don't have to worry, just focus on crafting the artifact. Liang Changgong bowed and said, Zhenren Zhang, we will enter the formation now. Wei Shudan and Hua Xiaofang also bowed with a Dao salute. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and returned the greeting. He said, then I will wait here for the good news. The three of them bowed again, then opened the restrictive formation and stepped into the pit. Then, they closed the restrictive formation, and mist rose up. From this moment on, other than the earth energy that could enter and exit without obstruction, no one else could enter the inner area. Zhang Yan took a few steps back and sat in front of the heavenly furnace. He took out a handful of earth fiend essence sand from his sleeve. This was obtained from the Feiyu Daoist palace. Even though he had to guard the earth chi and could not go above the extreme heaven, with this item, it would not hinder his cultivation. However, just as he was about to cultivate, he felt a chill all over his body. Suddenly, a strange feeling surged. This feeling came without warning, and it came and went in a flash. He frowned and stopped what he was doing. As his cultivation improved, he could faintly sense his own well-being. What happened just now was not a good sign, so he immediately became alert. He thought for a long time and thought to himself, could it be that someone is coveting this treasure? After thinking for a while, he smiled. Different situations call for different actions. At his current cultivation level, as long as it was not the Zhenren of the heavenly abode, he would be able to avoid it. Moreover, the matter had not yet arrived, so why bother thinking about it? In an instant, he got rid of the distracting thoughts, closed his eyes, and focused. He sat there and cultivated. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly, a soft and clear voice rang in his ears. Fellow Taoist, are you a cultivator from the Donghua continent? Zhang Yan opened his eyes in surprise. He looked up and saw a delicate Taoist nun standing in front of him. Her eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, and she had an oval face. Her shoulders were sharp, and her figure was a little thin. Her sleeves were empty, as if they would be blown away by the wind. However, her aura was vast and surging, and it was hard to tell her cultivation level. Zhang Yan stood up slowly and replied, I am Qinsang Zhang Yan. How should I address you, Taoist? The Taoist nun smiled at him and said, my surname is Cheng. She slowly turned her face and looked at the earthly fire heavenly cauldron. Her eyes were filled with melancholy. This place was created by I in the past. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of years have passed, and everything has changed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Taoist Cheng, you seem to have something on your mind. The Taoist nun looked at him unhappily and said, I am not a celestial, how can I not have troubles? Don't tell me those whose cultivation levels are much higher than mine have fewer troubles. At this point, she could not help but let out a soft sigh and said, I am just about to leave, so I specially came here to take a look at the things that are about to leave. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly, and he said, I still need to refine treasures here. Even if I leave this place, I will have to wait until I finish refining the treasures. The Taoist nun's bright eyes looked over and she couldn't help but laugh. You are very straightforward and honest, and also a bit overbearing. To tell you the truth, I originally wanted you to protect this place and keep it safe, but now it seems that I can't restrain you. Forget it, everything has life and death, there is a beginning and an end, and there will be a day when the flowers fall and wither. She seemed to have thought of something and stretched out a jade arm from her sleeve. She opened her white palm and took out an item. She said, I have to leave now. That person is really powerful. Even if he doesn't die, he probably doesn't have many years left to live. This item is useless to me, so I will give it to you, Taoist friend. When you finish refining the treasures, it might be of some use. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and took it. Before he could take a closer look, he saw the Taoist nun smiling at him. Then, her figure suddenly disappeared and scattered. Countless petals and flying leaves rolled up together and went to the clouds, forming a magnificent sea of flowers that was dozens of miles long. It was luxurious and colorful. At this time, he heard a song coming from the clouds. The sorrow of flowers, the beauty of time is fading. Who will listen to the grievances and pity? The incense array covers the stars, and the wind changes the sky. The peerless Dharma idol made a turn in the air and flew towards the zenith heaven. The sound of a zither broke through the sky in an instant, and countless purple and red flowers filled the void. It was not until an hour later that the Dharma idol completely disappeared. But he was not the only one who saw this strange phenomenon. In the Feiyu Taoist palace, Shang Teng stood up and rushed out of the cultivation residence. Huang Zuoguang came out with him, but the latter's eyes were full of confusion and surprise. He cried out involuntarily, Jinren Cheng. Where is she going? Unlike him, Shang Teng's eyes were filled with shock and a trace of irrepressible joy. He suppressed his new emotions and said in a guessing tone, the thoughts of people in Mount Dongtian are not known by you and me. Maybe Jinren Cheng wants to travel far away. Chapter 194 Struggle for the Great Tao Free Full Text Chapter 194 The incense array covers the stars, and the wind changes the sky. The wind changes the sky. Chapter 458 Since Jinren Cheng has left, the great event can be expected. As he held the letter in his hand, even someone as solemn as him could not help but reveal a smile on his face. With the departure of this Taoist master paradise, the biggest obstacle in front of Lai Xian sect had disappeared without a trace. Although they had paid a great price to invite that person, compared to the divine beast egg, it was nothing. After a while, he slowly calmed down. He put down the letter and said to the blue-robed Taoist sitting to his right, Nephew Rui, how is the arrangement going? Taoist Rui said, Martial Nephew has already prepared the ancestral master's divine statue and is only waiting to go to Pingxi to bury it. But this time, we have used up all the resources that our cult has accumulated for hundreds of years. Now the warehouse is empty, enough for horses to gallop, there is nothing left. Obviously, Gong Yangxing didn't care about this at all. He said, it doesn't matter. These things are there to be used. As long as we succeed, we can buy them back. Martial Nephew, you don't have to feel bad. Taoist Rui agreed. He paused and tried to mention something. Recently, Qingshi Temple and Jinling sect have been paying attention to our sect's movements. Martial Nephew doesn't know how to make arrangements to hide from their eyes and ears. Gong Yangxing sighed inwardly. This Martial Nephew's ability to handle matters was very mediocre. It seemed like he still had to ask him about such a small matter. Fortunately, this person was obedient enough. Disciples like Yi Jiliu, although their cultivation was not weak, were arrogant and unruly just because of their abilities. They were difficult to control. He already had a plan in mind regarding this matter, thereupon he said, this matter is easy to hear, you go spread the news. Let's say that 4 years from now, on the 6th day of the 8th month, it will be my patriarch's 500-year ascension ceremony, that we should gather the cult's people to celebrate. Shiji, what do you think of this excuse? Taoist Rui was startled and said in admiration, Martial Uncle's plan is brilliant. The Lai Xian sect had only been established for less than 500 years. Whether Venerable Iya had ascended or not, those who had lived longer in the middle pillar state were all very clear in their hearts. However, they could not stop the Lai Xian sect from flattering themselves. If he used this as an excuse to gather all the elders together, he would not be able to do so. It could indeed reduce the suspicions of Qingshi Temple and Golden Towering sect to the greatest extent, and it could also lower the guard of Zhenluo alliance. Taoist Rui was full of praise for this policy, but Ram Xing shook his head slightly. He picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip before asking, "How is that Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan was the key to the success or failure of this trip, so how could Taoist Rui not pay attention to him? Over at Shuang Fengyue's place, there had always been spies keeping an eye on him. He didn't even think before replying, it was said in the recent letters. In front of the heavenly cauldron of earth fire, I'm afraid he won't be able to leave without several years. Gong Yangsheng's hands suddenly paused and said, I heard that the higher the grade of the treasure, the longer it takes to refine it. Priest Rui answered honestly, Martial nephew doesn't understand this, but I've asked many experts before. I think so. Gong Yangsheng slowly put down the teacup and said solemnly, then, junior nephew, do you think that if Priest Zhang fails, will he leave early? Taoist Rui was stunned. He had never thought of this. But on second thought, this was indeed a problem. If Zhang Yan failed to refine the treasure, he would definitely fling his sleeves and return to the Donghua continent. But if that was the case, wouldn't all their arrangements be for naught? He hesitated. Liang and Wei are both master blacksmiths, I don't think they will fail, right? Gong Yangsheng gazed into the distance, and only after a long while did he say, there's always a chance. Send a letter to tell Shangting that he must be safe before our sect takes action. Taoist Rui didn't dare to disobey and said, Martial nephew understands. Gong Yangsheng pondered for a moment. He continued, also, tell him to quickly obtain the method to open the Twin Peaks moon restriction. If it really doesn't work, he has to find a way to deal with Huang Zuoguang before we go there. One did not know how long one had been cultivating. On the Twin Moon Peak, winter passed and spring came. For years had passed unknowingly. One day, in the Taoist palace of Feiyu, Huang Zuoguang was refining a treasure when he suddenly heard a Taoist child reporting that Shangteng had invited him to discuss some matters. He couldn't help but feel surprised. He and Shangteng had never been on good terms. In the past, Che Yi would mediate between them, so they were still at peace. However, once Che Yi left, even if they bumped into each other, they would only greet each other. Why would he invite him today? Huang Zuoguang pondered. Was there something important in the alliance that Shangteng suddenly invited him? With that thought, he didn't dare to delay any longer and immediately set off. According to the letter, he met Shangteng at a pavilion in the back mountain of the Taoist palace. The place was surrounded by mountains and rivers, and there was a waterfall hanging from the cliff. The fragrance of flowers filled the air, and the scenery was beautiful. The guard of the Twin Moon Peak changed every 30 years. Huang Zuoguang usually only cared about cultivating and rarely went out, so he didn't know when such a beautiful scenery had been created in the back mountain. After sitting in the pavilion for a while, he suddenly saw a light fall not far away. After the light faded, Shangteng appeared. He walked into the pavilion and bowed to Huang Zuoguang, Brother Huang, I had something to deal with just now, so I came late. Please forgive me. Shangteng usually spoke coldly to Huang Zuoguang, so the latter was suddenly not used to his politeness. After a slight pause, he said, Brother, I wonder why you asked me to come here. Shangteng looked down the mountain. This place was specially chosen by him. It was remote and quiet. When the two of them talked, no one dared to come close. However, he still seemed worried and said in a deep voice, Brother, please wait a moment. He waved his hand and a gray smoke spread out. In a moment, it covered everything within 100 feet. Not only was the wind and rain unable to pass through, but even the sun, moon, and stars could not enter. An imperceptible smile appeared on Shangzhen's face. In this way, no one would be able to detect anything that happened here. Although Huang Zuoguang was suspicious, he did not speak when he saw Shangzhen being so cautious. Only when Shangzhen sat down did he ask anxiously, Brother, what happened? Shangteng reached into his sleeve and took out a letter, saying, Brother, please take a look. Huang Zuoguang did not know what was going on. He quickly took the letter and flipped through it. He was shocked by the content and cried out, What, Lai Xian sect is actually planning such a scheme? Because the news of the Lai Xian sect ceremony had spread to the entire world, everyone knew that on that day, the elders of the sect would probably have to return to the main altar. As the day approached, the pressure on the Zhenluo alliance was greatly reduced and they relaxed a lot. However, this letter said that Lai Xian's sect was planning to deceive everyone and was preparing to launch a surprise attack on the Twin Moon Peak. Huang Zuoguang never thought that there was an inside story. He found it hard to believe, and the more he read, the more shocked he became. After he finished reading, he put down the letter in his hand and said, "Brother, where did you get this news from?" Shang Ting shook his head and pointed at his hand, saying, "Just now I got this news, so I did not dare to make a decision. I immediately invited you over. There is an inside story written on the back of this letter. Brother, you will understand if you continue reading." Huang Zuoguang was startled. He hurriedly flipped the letter over and saw a portrait drawn on it. A Taoist was sitting cross-legged. There was a treasure light behind him and he had a peaceful expression. He looked like an immortal. He had fought with Lai Xian's sect for many years, so he immediately recognized that it was the portrait of his sect's ancestor, Iya. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the portrait suddenly seemed to come to life. Its eyes opened and a golden light shot out. Huang Zuoguang was caught off guard. He screamed and fell back while covering his eyes. Even though his eyes were in extreme pain, his mind wasn't in chaos, and he immediately realized that something was wrong. He practically instinctively activated his protective treasure light, and then with a command in his mind, a strand of light rose up before a thick and heavy bronze bell that was over a meter in size appeared before him. At this moment, a bolt of lightning struck down and hit the copper bell. With a rumble, the copper bell only trembled and was not damaged at all. Shang Zhen sighed in pity. He did not expect Huang Zuoguang to react so quickly. Fortunately, he had prepared a backup plan. Especially since Huang Zuoguang's eyes were injured, he had lost more than half of his combat power. No matter how he struggled, he could not escape. He made a gesture and set up a formation. The soil under his feet moved and a red net flew out and covered the copper bell. It struggled back and forth, but the net was extremely tough. It held it tightly and could not escape at all. At the same time, Shang Teng let out a shout and raised a colorful wooden box into the air. Clang! 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 Three sounds that sounded like gold and iron colliding were heard as three small green arrows flew out from the box. They seemed to be condensed from smoke and had shape but no substance. They were divided into the top, middle, and bottom and shot straight at Huang Zuoguang. Huang Zuoguang was at a disadvantage because his eyes were injured and he could not distinguish things. He did not know where Shang Teng's attack came from. He could only use the treasure light to defend himself. Who would have thought that this smoke arrow had an ulterior motive? The protective treasure light was unable to obstruct it in the slightest. It pierced right through his forehead, chest, and lower abdomen. He let out a muffled groan and fell to the ground. Shang Zhen took a few steps forward and shook out a rope made of black gas from his sleeve. It fell and tied Huang Zuoguang tightly. Huang Zuoguang felt his body go numb. He was furious and was about to curse. But just as he was about to hit Zhang Yan, the rope tightened and the essence in his body dissipated. His eyelids drooped and he felt drowsy. He wanted to struggle but he could not exert any strength. After a while, he completely lost consciousness. The copper bell lost its control and its light faded. With a clang, it fell to the ground. Shang Zhen took a few deep breaths. Although he had made a lot of preparations, if Huang Zuoguang did not think about defending after blocking that attack and instead risked his life to charge out, he would not have been able to capture this person so easily. It could be said that he was somewhat lucky. After capturing this person, he was the only one in charge here. From now on, the door of Double Moon Peak was completely open to Lai Xian sect. Shang Teng smiled proudly. As long as he took down Zhang Yan and took back the divine beast egg, he would be at the top of the list of rewards. He took a few steps and leisurely sat back in the pavilion. He took out a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. He then picked up the brush and wrote a letter. There were extraordinary words of self-praise in it. After reading it a few times, he felt satisfied and quickly put it into the letter. He looked up and chanted a few incantations. He raised his hand and grabbed, retracting the mist. Looking at the clear sky, he snorted and threw the letter into the sky. He was only relieved when it flew away and disappeared. Chapter 459. The Struggle for the Great Tao. Chapter 196. The Struggle for the Great Tao. The Golden Bridge leads 10,000 mountains. On the 6th day of the 8th month, the grand ceremony of the Xian sect's patriarch, the 7 Yuanying Zenrens of the sect returned to the main altar. However, regardless of whether it was the disciples or the guests, they did not know that among the 7 of them, other than Grand Elder Gong Yangda who was still presiding over the ceremony, the rest of them only showed themselves briefly during the ceremony. After that, they hid in the inner hall and did not appear again. The ones who were left on the stage were only a few substitutes. These substitutes were not found in a hurry, but they had been preparing for a few years. There were hundreds of thousands of disciples in the Xian sect, so it was not difficult to find a few people who looked similar, but the difficulty was that their cultivation and aura could not be faked, so they used many methods to conceal it. Until now, they could finally pass off the fake as genuine and pass off fish eyes as pearls. But even so, it was easy to reveal flaws when they met those with sharp eyesight. Especially the great elder Gong Yangsheng, there were too many people who were familiar with him. In addition, he had to preside over the ceremony and could not leave. In front of the cultivators from various sects who came to watch the ceremony, it was impossible to find substitutes from the beginning to the end, so he had to first put on a good show before he could find an opportunity to withdraw. In the inner hall, 6 Yuanying elders were sitting around. Priest Rui looked around and sighed. Fortunately, the Qingshi temple and the Jinling sect did not send envoys to watch the ceremony, otherwise we and the other substitutes would not be able to hide. The female Taoist surnamed Tan widened her eyes and suddenly asked, what method did senior brother Rui use to make them not come to watch the ceremony? It would be unreasonable if they did not invite their fellow Taoists for the grand ceremony of the Xian sect, and at the same time, it would arouse suspicion. But if they invited someone over, it would be inevitable that they would give themselves away. Now, none of the disciples of the Qingshi temple and the Jinling sect had come. There must be a reason behind it, and she was very curious about how Priest Rui did it. Priest Rui laughed and said, Junior Sister Tan, it's actually not difficult. As long as the guest is willing to worship the golden statue of our sect's patriarch, he can be allowed to enter the inner altar. Otherwise, we can only ask him to stand in the outer hall to watch the ceremony. The female Taoist surnamed Tan suddenly understood and pursed her lips into a smile. No wonder. The Golden Soaring sect and the Qingshi temple were, after all, 2 of the 3 sects in Pingdong. How would they be willing to pay respects to the patriarch of the Lai Xian sect when they were in the Middle Pillar continent? However, they weren't willing to stand together with the scattered sects and small clans outside the hall. Thus, they simply ignored it and pretended that they hadn't heard about it. The Lai Xian sect had always been spreading their teachings everywhere. Wherever the disciples went, they had to persuade others to worship their ancestors. Now that it was the ancestral master's ascension sacrificial ceremony, it was not surprising that the sect had such a request. The cultivators of the 2 sects also did not think that they actually had other intentions. While they were chatting excitedly, Yi Jiliu was getting impatient from waiting. Martial uncle, how long do you want us to wait? It was just a few disciples from a small sect. What need was there for them to continue pretending? If he doesn't make a move, then so be it. Let's set off together. Can't he take down Daoist Zhang? He shook his sleeves, stood up, and walked out. As he walked, he said, I'll go talk to Martial Uncle. There's no need to wait any longer. Daoist Rui saw that the situation wasn't good, so he hurriedly grabbed his sleeves. He tried to persuade him, Senior brother Yi, Martial Uncle has his own arrangements. Senior brother, please don't be reckless. Yi Jiliu's eyebrows twitched. He shook off his hand and slowly turned around, saying coldly, what do you mean by reckless? Junior brother, tell me properly. Daoist Rui saw the coldness in his eyes and immediately realized that he had said the wrong thing in a moment of desperation. This senior brother of his was violent, easily angered, and belligerent. If he didn't handle it well, something big would happen. However, he wasn't good at adapting to situations, so his forehead was instantly covered in sweat. Daoist Shah, who was sitting there, shouted in a deep voice, "Yi Jiliu, I'll let you be if you're so impulsive normally, but what day is it today? It can be said that the rise and fall of the Lai Xian sect depends on today. How can we allow you to act recklessly here?" However, not only did his words fail to intimidate Yi Jiliu, they had the opposite effect. Veins popped up on the sides of Yi Jiliu's eyes as he burst with anger. He had never been on good terms with Daoist Shah. It would have been better if Daoist Shah hadn't spoken, but the moment he did, he was immediately infuriated. He roared, "Shao Yang, who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like that? Are you here to see if the magic sword at my waist is sharp enough?" In the past, Daoist Shah would either smile and avoid Yi Jiliu's provocations or simply ignore him. However, for some reason today, he acted out of character and retorted without backing down, "How dare you? In terms of seniority, I'm your martial uncle. How dare you threaten me? You disrespectful disciple, if you dare to fight me, do you think I won't be able to kill you in the ancestral hall?" When the other four saw that an internal strife might occur if they did not stop him, they immediately came forward to persuade him. Yi Jiliu's eyes flickered wildly. Those who were familiar with him would know that this was a sign that the rage in his heart was about to accumulate to the limit. However, at this moment, a flying talisman was sent over. Daoist Rui reached out to catch it. After taking a glance at it, he suddenly heaved a sigh of relief and turned to pass it to Yi Jiliu. "Senior brother, please take a look." Yi Jiliu frowned and received it suspiciously. He could not help but be stunned after taking a glance at it. Why is she here? According to the talisman, a Taoist companion of Yi Jiliu had come to look for him in the past. This woman belonged to no sect and came from a small clan. She left him after he became a nascent soul, and they had not seen each other for 200 years. However, her sudden appearance today inevitably made him puzzled. Daoist Rui said meaningfully, "Martial uncle has said in advance that it's impossible for those two sects to let go of their suspicions with such great fanfare. Although their disciples won't come, they can invite others to come and investigate our sect's movements. This woman was most likely invited by them to specifically come here to test Senior Martial Brother. If Senior Martial Brother avoids meeting her or uses a substitute to deal with her, then we'll be exposed." Yi Jiliu's expression flickered. He snorted and said, "What's there to be afraid of? I'll go and meet her right now." He glared at Daoist Sand and stepped out. Daoist Rui was still worried, so he hurriedly cupped his hands at the other spiritual masters in the hall before turning to follow. No one noticed the flash of regret in Daoist Sand's eyes. He thought to himself, what a pity. Just now, it would be great if we could injure this boorish fellow here. He used himself to measure others. He thought that with 7 or 8 spiritual masters working together, they would be able to suppress Zhang Yan no matter what. One more or one less person would not actually matter as it would not affect the overall situation. Moreover, he knew Yi Jiliu's temperament very well. This person was not good at accomplishing anything but was good at spoiling things. If he was allowed to act recklessly, it would be hard to avoid ruining the big picture. Thus, he attacked him with words to provoke his anger so that he would have an excuse to injure him. Given this person's temperament, he would most likely not go with them after suffering such a setback. However, he did not expect that a flying talisman would unexpectedly disrupt his plans. Fate was making fools of people, and he was powerless. The remaining 4 people waited for another hour. Suddenly, the candles in front of the hall flickered and the jade curtain was lifted. Elder Gong Yangsheng stepped in from outside, with Yi Jiliu and Daoist Rui on the left and right behind him. The elders in the hall knew that the time had come. They tried their best to suppress the agitation in their hearts as they stood up solemnly and bowed. Gong Yangsheng returned the greeting. He looked around and said loudly, "Fellow brethren, 500 years ago, our sect was born in response to the situation and rose to prominence in Pingdong. However, there was a flaw in this. The three sects in Central Continent stood side by side, and our sect only had a corner. Our hands and feet were unable to relax. But 500 years later, a divine object fell from the sky. If our sect could obtain this treasure, we would be able to secure our fate for thousands of years. When that day comes, it would not be wishful thinking to live in Central Continent." Having said that, Gong Yangsheng flicked his sleeves and went to the statue of the patriarch, kneeling on the praying mat. The 6 elders also hurriedly knelt down and paid their respects. Gong Yangsheng kowtowed thrice before standing up and offering the immortal incense. He prayed in his heart, "Patriarch, please bless this disciple's journey to be smooth. I will take back the treasure in one fell swoop and ensure that our sect's fate will be long and never decline." After paying his respects, he picked up the horsetail whisk and placed it on his arm. He turned around and said, "Fellow brethren, follow me." He flicked the horsetail whisk and activated the Dharma. In a split second, a 10,000 feet golden light rose from the underground path and rushed to the sky. The elders in the hall were in a trance. Their bodies felt light and they all leaped up with the light, flying into the clouds. Coincidentally, it was the time of the worship hall's grand ceremony of the Golden Day. The spectators only thought that Lai Xian sect deliberately made such a big scene. In addition, they covered it up well, so no one suspected anything. In the blink of an eye, the 7 of them had traveled tens of thousands of miles and arrived at the boundary of the branch altar that had been set up beforehand. They found the patriarch's statue that was enshrined here and performed the same method again. They leaped up the 10,000 miles golden bridge and flew all the way to Pingxi. Mount Luchishan. Zhang Yan suddenly felt something. He opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He stared into the heavenly cauldron of earth fire. The chi of earth there suddenly churned and flowed chaotically. The heat wave was oppressive as if he was in front of a boiling spring. Even if he was not proficient in this, he knew that the talisman was about to be born. He stood silently for a moment before raising his head and looking at the sky. Ever since perfected Tianqing left, he had never let his guard down. These 4 years passed peacefully. He thought to himself that if there were any unusual movements, it would definitely be on the day that the talisman was forged. He waited until midnight. Suddenly, there was a rumbling sound under the heavenly cauldron. It was as if 1,000 drums were beating. The sound was intense and spread far and wide. The birds within 100 miles were startled and flew up in flocks. In the Twin Moon Peak, there were many cultivators who noticed the commotion. They stood up and leaped onto the clouds. They gazed into the distance and speculated in private. They wondered what kind of miraculous abilities this talisman would have after being forged by 2 master craftsmen for 4 years. However, at this moment, there was a sudden sound of thunder that pierced through the clouds. It was as if a tree was being smashed into a city. Each sound was louder than the previous one. There were rays of light that pierced through the sky. Not to mention the common people, even the cultivators were shocked. They did not know what was happening and looked up at the sky. There were ripples in the void. Layers of ripples spread out. Everyone could hear the sound of rolling stones and avalanches. Just as they were feeling uneasy, they suddenly heard a cracking sound. It was as if a spirit mirror had broken or a silver bottle had cracked. 1,000-foot-long light cliff climbed up. In the flickering light and shadow, 7 people slowly walked out of the void. They were either dressed in colorful clothes, cloaks, brocade robes with big sleeves, or a crown and a wide belt. Each of them was holding a talisman, a flying sword, a lightning pillar, and a horsetail whisk. Their bodies were covered in golden stars and the clouds were bright. For a moment, they looked like immortals who had descended to the mortal world. The 7 great elders of Lai Xian sect had crossed thousands of mountains and rivers and arrived at the Twin Moon Peak. The Struggle for the Great Tao Chapter 196 The Struggle for the Great Tao The Golden Bridge Leads 10,000 Mountains Update completed. Chapter 460. Ever since Twin Moon City was built, it had never been invaded by an enemy for hundreds of years. At this moment, the sudden appearance of the 7 elders of the Xian sect immediately caused a lingering fear on the Double Moon Peak. However, these 7 nascent soul-perfected ones ignored the Feiyu Dao Palace that was just a few feet away. They did not stop at all, each of them riding a streak of light as they headed straight for Mount Luchi that was 500 miles away. Gong Yangsheng parted the clouds and walked at the front. His robe fluttered as he said, "Fellow sect members, this is the most important place of Zhenluo Union. We cannot stay here for long. We need to end this quickly." Even though Zhenluo Union was not on good terms, they would soon find out that Twin Moon Peak was attacked. They would not sit back and do nothing. The elders closest to them would probably arrive in half a day. If they were to use the formation to hold them back, they would not be able to leave safely. The other 6 people knew this and agreed in unison. Gong Yangsheng glanced around and saw a jade talisman flying towards him. It hovered by his side like a leaf and did not leave for a long time. He saw that it was used by Lai Xian sect, so he reached out to take it. He took a look and was overjoyed. Good, Daoist Shang has succeeded and captured Huangzuohuang. There is no one in charge of the formation here. With him in charge of the Taoist Palace, we will not have to worry for now. We can take back the divine item in one go. Zhenluo Union had been operating in Twin Moon Peak for hundreds of years. It was surrounded by a large formation and only needed 3 elders to activate it. Previously, they were worried about this. That was why they planned to move Che Yi away. They wanted to find a way to prevent the formation from unleashing its power. Now that Shang Teng had taken care of Huangzuoguang, there was no need to worry about this anymore. After hearing the news, the 7 of them were energized. They felt that their chances of success were higher. Therefore, they rushed forward and flew with all their might. 7 nascent soul Daoist masters were gathered in one place. The moment they appeared, Zhang Yan, who was far away beside the earth-fire heavenly furnace, had already sensed it. He woke up from his meditation and looked at the sky. Seeing that they were coming towards him, he knew that they did not come with good intentions. With a clear shout, he soared into the sky. As the other party got closer, his appearance became clearer. Zhang Yan had dealt with Lai Xian sect a few times, and just from the shape of their robes, he could tell that these 7 people were from Lai Xian sect. He couldn't help but think to himself, I heard that there are 9 Yuanying elders in the Xian sect, but Gua and Pang have been killed by me, and these 7 people are all Yuanying cultivators. Could it be that all the elders in the sect are here? As he thought about it, he couldn't help but sneer. Apart from the divine beast egg, what else was there that was worth them making such a big fuss over? His intentions could be said to be as clear as day. However, the other party's timing was very clever. At this moment, the magic treasure that he had refined was about to be born, so he couldn't escape. Moreover, these 7 people did not even hesitate for a moment before rushing towards him. Clearly, this attack was not a blind one. It must have been meticulously prepared. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. The warning signs in his heart were probably related to this matter. A bloody battle was probably unavoidable. In just a moment, the 7 of them arrived in front of the cauldron of earth fire. Seeing that Zhang Yan was standing steadily in front of them, they circled around him and all of them shouted out loud, channeling their spells. The Yuanying people all flew out of the cauldron. Under the night sky, the clouds shone brightly, and it was filled with light clouds and mist, covering this area of the world. Zhang Yan faced the 7 of them alone. Under the gazes that were filled with enmity, his expression was calm and composed, without any fear. Gong Yangsheng stood out from the crowd. This was the first elder. 3 astral clouds had already appeared above his head. It was obvious that he had already stepped into the 2nd layer of the nascent soul stage. His cultivation was a level higher than the other 6. He cupped his hands and said condescendingly, "Spiritual Master Zhang, the 7 of us came here just to get the divine beast. If you return it to us, we can let bygones be bygones." If you are unwilling, there is no need for Daoran to say what will happen to you. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and smiled. Fellow cultivators, I don't think you are here to argue. There is no need to say more, let's fight. Gong Yangsheng originally thought that if Zhang Yan was forced by their power and willingly handed over the divine beast, that would be the best. At that time, it would be up to him to advance or retreat. If he failed, it wouldn't be too late to make a move. However, seeing that Zhang Yan's tone was unyielding and there was no room for discussion, he immediately gave up trying to persuade him. He said indifferently, since fellow cultivator insists on doing this, then don't blame us for using our power to oppress you. Why are you still talking to him? Yi Jiliu couldn't hold back anymore. Seeing that the two of them couldn't come to an agreement, he ignored the others and rushed out first without waiting for Gong Yangsheng's order. When he was halfway there, he slapped his waist and a ka-chong lang sound was heard. A silver rainbow flew out of the sheath and turned in the air. Accompanied by the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger, it quickly came down to kill. This magical sword hadn't even come close, but the cold air emitted from the sword's edge had already shot out. Zhang Yan squinted at the flying magic sword. The blade was as white as snow, and there were countless silver threads on both sides of the sword, wriggling like branches. It was very strange and should have some unique features. Therefore, he didn't dare to be careless. With a long roar, a golden light bloomed above his head. In the dense mist, a yuanying figure with 5-colored brilliance behind it appeared. Yi Jiliu's magic sword was called the Dragon Centipede Sword. It contained several transformations, especially the sword refining method, which was borrowed from the secret technique of the Shaoqing sect. It was extremely powerful, and it had never lost a battle against its enemies. Back then, the Shaoqing sect had lost dozens of disciples in battle in the Middle Pillar continent. Some of them had secret manuals on their treasures, and many of them were taken by the cultivators of the Middle Pillar continent. Although they couldn't learn the orthodox methods, a group of intelligent people found a strange path and derived many powerful methods. Yi Jiliu was one of them. After obtaining this method, he spent more than 10 years to refine this magic sword. When the two were combined, its power was multiplied. Now, apart from the two elders who were a generation older than him, his battle prowess could be said to be the strongest here. Therefore, he thought highly of himself. When he saw that Zhang Yan was only a cloud above his head and that his cultivation was a level lower than his own, his confidence was immediately boosted. Even though he knew that Zhang Yan's divine ability was powerful, he still dared to fight him alone. When the others saw that Yi Jiliu had already made his move, they wanted to follow him and kill him together, but they were stopped by Ram Sheng. He looked down and said in a deep voice, "It's fine to let him try. If he can't win, we can go forward." Yi Jiliu had always been a prideful person. If he did not say anything, the crowd would probably fall out with him if they were to step forward to help him. Thus, he might as well let them do as they pleased. This could be considered as a test to gauge Zhang Yan's strength. As the sword light approached, Zhang Yan didn't dodge at all. A yellow glow fell from his back and spread out, forming a light barrier that was 30 feet tall and half a kilometer wide in front of him. This yellow glow was thick and solid. The dragon centipede sword only managed to advance a few inches before it found it difficult to move forward. Yi Jiliu snorted coldly and immediately used his divine ability. He pointed his finger, and the magical sword trembled slightly. Countless strands of silver hair fell off from the body of the sword, hissing as they searched for an opening and penetrated the yellow radiance in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan was calm and composed. His body did not move as he waited for the silver whiskers to reach him. Then, a blue light appeared behind him and flashed past. Like a surging wave, the blue light engulfed the silver whiskers and swallowed them whole. Yi Jiliu was slightly startled by this and his expression turned grave. He let out a low roar and made a series of hand seals. The dragon centipede sword trembled incessantly as the silver whiskers on it grew and fell again. In just a few breaths' time, there were tens of thousands of them, blotting out the sky and the sun. With another wave of his hand, the tens of thousands of silver needles twisted into several strands and spread out in a formation, attacking from several directions. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back. The blue glow behind him flickered incessantly like a flood and rumbled. The silver needles continued to rush forward, but no matter how many there were, they were all like stones thrown into the sea, disappearing without a trace. The 6 spectators frowned as they watched. A few of them had experienced Yi Jiliu's magic sword before, so they knew how powerful it was. Even though he had yet to use his final trump card, it was not something that could be easily parried. However, Zhang Yan was handling it with such ease. It was obvious that he was still holding back. They had never seen such a technique before. Looking at his back, there was a total of 5 colored lights circulating. 2 of them had already stopped Yi Jiliu's attack, but there were still 3 more that he hadn't used. They wondered what other mysteries were hidden within. Of course, Zhang Yan wouldn't just defend without attacking. Taking advantage of a gap in Yi Jiliu's attack, he flicked his sleeve and several dozen drops of heavy water splashed out. Yi Jiliu saw that the drops of heavy water were only the size of water droplets. They were as black as ink, devoid of light and color, and looked unremarkable. Initially, he had underestimated them, but when they collided with his protective light, a loud boom rang out. It was as if he had been struck by a heavy hammer, causing him to lose his footing and sway uncontrollably. Only now did he realize how powerful they were. He hurriedly took a few steps back and activated his transcendence energy. The protective light of Yuanying's protective light grew brighter, and he summoned his flying sword to protect himself. He flew back and forth, flashing repeatedly. After a flurry of movements, he managed to catch the several dozen drops of heavy water. Seeing this, Daoist Rui sighed. I've long advised Senior Marshal Brother Yi to refine a transcendent artifact to protect himself, but he just wouldn't listen. Regardless of whether it was attacking or defending, the Shaoqing sect always relied on a sword pellet. It was known as one sword master's life and death, solitary path carries yin and yang. Ever since Yi Jiliu learned this method, he felt that this saying was to his liking. Thus, he learned it to the fullest. He felt that a magic sword was enough for him to roam the world, so he didn't bother to refine some protective artifact. Seeing that Yi Jiliu had no time to deal with anything else, Zhang Yan wouldn't miss this opportunity. He pointed his finger, and the yellow light rose higher and higher like dust. When it reached the sky, it came crashing down with an earth-shattering rumble. Shock finally appeared in Yi Jiliu's eyes. In the face of such an attack, when one couldn't figure out the opponent's strength, the only thing one could do was turn around and dodge. However, there were fellow disciples watching from the side. If he had to retreat after just a few moves, how could he do such a shameful thing? With a shrill cry, he held the magic sword in a backhand grip and slashed a few times. The silver light was like a thunderbolt in the night sky, cutting open a few openings in this earth element true light. He then leaped up and was about to rush out from the front. However, he had only flown 1,000 feet away when he felt the yellow soil around him flying and dust and sand were everywhere. The further he went, the more sluggish his body became. At this moment, he saw the turbid smoke and dust rolling. Looking around, he suddenly realized that he had barged into a palm that was 1,000 feet in size. His expression couldn't help but change. Just as he was about to retreat, he saw the 5 fingers suddenly move and close inwards. Chapter 461. When Yi Jiliu saw that the hand was closing in, he could only hurriedly open the protective light around his body and forcefully resist it. However, the 5 fingers continued to close in with great force, pressing down like layers of mountains. Seeing that the protective light was on the verge of shattering, Yi Jiliu's expression changed, and he immediately began to feel regret. He did not have any protective talisman, and could only rely on his own strength to hold on. Just now, if he were to risk his life and slash with his sword, he might still be able to fight his way out. However, it was too late now, and he could not free his hands at all. If no one came to his rescue, he would be crushed into a pile of minced meat in no time. Seeing that he was at his wit's end, with a wave of his horsetail whisk, he no longer hesitated and shouted, "Save him!" The other 5 also saw that the situation was critical, and they all made their moves. However, their speed varied, and their targets were also different. As soon as he opened his mouth to speak, he produced a jade talisman from his sleeve that was emanating a faint aura. The talisman had dragon and tiger markings engraved on its front, and he tossed it out. It flew down from the cloud and slammed into the huge Xian Huang hand. The 4 martial nephews behind him also took out their talisman and attacked together with him. Daoist Sand, however, paid no attention to Yi Jiliu. Expressionlessly, he flicked his sleeve, and a golden white pellet the size of a goose egg shot out, which went straight for Zhang Yan. Just now, the jade talisman arrived. Zhang Yan raised his hand, and a gloomy yellow light rose up, blocking in front of him. As the two collided, a few cracks appeared on the jade talisman, and it was sent flying back. Meanwhile, the true earth light also cracked like a rock, exploding. The path ahead was unobstructed, and the 4 talismans behind just happened to rush in. They landed on the giant yellow hand one after another, and in an instant, they scattered it. They turned into thousands of wisps of yellow smoke that drifted in all directions. Yi Jiliu suddenly felt the pressure on him lessen, and he immediately saw an opportunity. He also wielded the dragon centipede sword and slashed with all his might, cleaving a path through the endless dust and sand. Using a flying technique, he escaped through the gap. Zhang Yan sneered and pointed with 2 fingers. With a clear cry, the stellar sword orb and the 5 spirits' white carp shuttle flew out together and chased after him. At this moment, Daoist Sha's golden white flying ball had also landed. Before it even got close to his body, the black robe on his body suddenly emitted a 3-chi bright light. It rushed up to meet the flying ball, but it only rolled on the ground and did not fall. Daoist San's expression froze as he said in a low voice, "Protective gown." The star's sword pellet was so fast that Yi Jiliu could not escape in time. He hurriedly summoned the dragon centipede sword over to parry. With a clang, it blocked the sword pellet. However, the pentaspirit white carp shuttle circled around, and under a fierce peck from it, the protective treasure light actually shattered. Yi Jiliu was shocked. The technique he cultivated wasn't of the orthodox profound school, so if the treasure light protecting his body was broken, he would need to refine it again. Then, when facing the pentaspirit white carp shuttle that was flying towards him, he would have no way to restrain it. Seeing this from the cloud, Ram Xing frowned. He threw the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the 1,000 threads scattered down like a net, actually wrapping around the pentaspirit white carp shuttle. However, this profound artifact seemed to be unwilling to admit defeat. It swung its head and tail, and the scales on its back glowed with a golden light. Unexpectedly, the net could not hold it in any longer, and the tenacious threads broke. In the blink of an eye, it rushed out. Now that Yi Jiliu had a chance to catch his breath, he didn't dare to be careless anymore. He chanted an incantation, pointed at the dragon centipede sword, and said, "Transform." The sword trembled. The front and the back were split into 2 sections. With another tremble, the sword body emitted a white light and turned into 2 identical magic swords. One flew up, still blocking the stellar sword ball, and the other flew back to his bosom like a tired bird returning to the forest. He reached out and grabbed the hilt. With a sword in hand, he regained some confidence. At this moment, the pentaspirit white carp shuttle was flying toward him again. Having seen how powerful this treasure was, he quickly flipped the magic sword upward, and with a clang, he barely managed to block it. However, this magic treasure was very intelligent, so he immediately circled around it, trying to find an opening. Everyone saw a golden light flying around him, chasing him relentlessly. Killing intent flickered in Zhang Yan's eyes. These 7 people came from the same sect, so if they attacked together, it wouldn't be easy to deal with them. It would be best if he could kill one of them first. Now that he had such a good opportunity, how could he miss it? Thus, he was not going to let Yi Jiliu off easily. With a command from his mind, the star's sword orbs suddenly jumped and transformed into 16 dazzling sword rays. Each of them shot out like arrows, whistling through the air as they slashed toward Yijiliu. Anyone could see that Yijiliu was already in dire straits under the siege of the spirit shuttles. If these 16 flying swords were to slash at him, he would die without a doubt. Gong Yangsheng had no choice but to save him again. However, after exchanging 2 blows with Zhang Yan, 2 of his magic treasures had already been destroyed, so he wasn't willing to use any more ordinary items to make up the numbers. With a shake of his body, an ancient jade rui appeared from a cloud above his head. It floated in the dense mist, bobbing up and down. Once it was activated, a ray of clear light shone down, piercing straight into the formation of the heaven pit of earth fire, illuminating everything down to the slightest detail. When the 16 sword rays were illuminated by this ray of light, it was as if they had fallen into mud. They were immediately hindered and slowed down. At this moment, Daoist San shouted, "Shixiang, let's work together to kill Daoist Zhang." At first, he had the idea of besieging Wei to rescue Zhao, attacking the enemy where he had to rescue Yijiliu. However, after Zhang Yan sensed a warning in his heart, he was already prepared. That was why he wore the 2 treasured robes, the 7 Stars Sun Binding Robe, and the Jing Luo Dun Jun Baoyu Robe, to protect himself. Daoist Sand alone couldn't take him down, but if there were several people working together, their chances would increase greatly. Reminded, Gong Yangsheng turned his gaze over. He also made a prompt decision and said, "Martial nephew Rui, quickly go back and protect him. Fellow brethren, follow me to surround and kill Daoist Zhang." Having received the order, Daoist Rui wanted to rush down to save Yijiliu before the flying swords arrived. Just now, Zhang Yan had found an opportunity. How could he allow the other party to save him? He spread his sleeves and 365 serene heavy drops flew out at the same time, scattering in all directions. Everyone had seen the power of this item earlier, so they couldn't care less about attacking the enemy. They had no choice but to stop and protect themselves. At the same time, Zhang Yan wanted to summon the star's sword pellet back with a thought. Who knew that the jade rui on top of Gong Yangsheng's head was rather marvelous? The brilliance it gave off was like a cage. The star's sword pellet went back and forth a few times, but when it reached the edge, it couldn't rush out. Gong Yangsheng waved his sleeves to block all the serene heavy water. Coincidentally, he saw this scene and couldn't help smiling. 500 years ago, during the battle with Shaoqing in the Middle Pillar State, he was lucky to escape with his life. Since then, after witnessing the power of the flying swords, he had been thinking about how to defend against them. This jade rui was refined to trap flying swords. Even if the Shaoqing sect disciples personally came to kill him with their flying swords, he was confident that he could restrain them. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Ever since he stepped into the Yuanying realm, the sword kinesis technique he learned could no longer keep up with his current cultivation base. Thus, he didn't rely on it as his main method. Originally, he wanted to find a chance to kill Yijiliu with his sword, but now it seemed that it wouldn't work. However, he had many methods now. Even if he didn't use this method, he didn't believe that he couldn't take down this person. However, with this delay, the other elders of Lai Xian sect also blocked the serene heavy water and regained their breaths. Gong Yangsheng didn't hesitate either. He secretly made a hand seal and a black iron ruler flew out from the top of his head. When the others saw that he had already made his move, they followed suit and took out their own magic treasures and attacked Zhang Yan at the same time. A cold light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He waved his sleeves and scattered more than 50 scarlet thunder beads. The water element true light around him rose and flew up, lifting these magic treasures. Immediately, white foam splattered and thousands of jade waves were smashed. Among these magic treasures, because the iron ruler was the first to open a path and it was controlled by its owner with all his strength, it was difficult for the water element true light to sweep and retract it. However, with the continuous flow of the water and the back and forth of the waves, it slowed down the momentum of the magic treasures. When Gong Yangsheng saw dozens of scarlet thunder beads flying towards him, he thought that it was still the serene in heavy water and was about to block it like just now. However, when it was right in front of him, his expression suddenly changed and he roared, "Dodge!" At first, the others were the same as him and didn't think much of it. When they heard his warning, they knew that this thing was definitely not simple. However, if they wanted to dodge now, it would be too late. They could only take out their protective magic treasures and brace themselves to withstand it. Waves of earth-shaking tremors came from the cloud, as if the sky was collapsing. Even with the protection of magic treasures, the 5 people, including Gong Yangsheng, were still blasted to the point that their blood and qi were boiling. Their clothes were torn and they were in a sorry state. They only managed to stop after retreating for a few miles. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Yan pointed with his hand and gathered the 365 drops of serene in heavy water in one place again, which then rushed towards Yi Jiliu like a torrent. On the other side, Daoist Rui was close to Yi Jiliu and was about to join forces with him to deal with the 5-spirit white carp shuttle. However, when he heard the rumbling behind him, he turned around and was startled. He quickly took out a banner and shook it against the wind. It grew to a height of 50 feet and he placed it in front of him. Just the dozens of drops of serene in heavy water were enough to make them unable to defend themselves, not to mention that they were all here at the moment. In just a few breaths, the banner was smashed into pieces. He hastily abandoned it and took out another jade talisman, but it only lasted for a short while before it shattered. The remaining 20% of serene in heavy water smashed onto the protective treasure light, causing his body to shake violently and the light to disperse. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and fell down. Zhang Yan took a step forward, and like a flickering light, he crossed the distance of 100 feet in a flash. When he reappeared, he was less than 30 feet away from Yi Jiliu. He raised his hand and pointed forward. A bolt of purple lightning seemed to sweep through the clear sky and burst forth with a loud bang. Yi Jiliu was also a courageous person. He knew that there was no way he could survive if he tried to dodge now, so he gritted his teeth and did not retreat. Instead, he gathered all his magic power in one place and brazenly raised the dragon centipede sword. A streak of silver light flashed like lightning and charged toward Zhang Yan, hoping to kill this formidable enemy first. However, as soon as the magic sword flew out, the 5-spirit white carp shuttle shot out from the side with a whistling sound and knocked it aside. At this moment, the purple heaven thunderbolt was already right in front of him. Yi Jiliu's protective treasure light had already been broken, and his magic sword had fallen out of his hand. In the face of this killing divine ability, he had no way to defend himself. He did not even have the time to let out a scream before his entire body exploded into dust with a loud bang. Daoist Rui was terrified at the sight of such a miserable state. Seeing that Zhang Yan had his back to him, he turned and ran without hesitation. He had not gone far when a fine golden light as thin as a gossamer caught up to him. It only flashed once on his body before it disappeared. He ran another 100 feet before his body suddenly stiffened. With a loud cry, his body was split into 2 at the waist and he fell from the sky. Chapter 462. Just now, the red lightning pearl had forced him several miles away and he couldn't help in time. Seeing how Zhang Yan killed 2 of them in an instant, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he stomped his feet and sighed, dispersing the spell that he had picked up. When the rest of the people from the Xian sect saw this scene, their eyes were filled with fear, but there was also a hint of bewilderment mixed in. They originally thought that no matter how strong this priest was, with the 7 of them working together, they would be able to defeat him. However, they didn't think that they would lose 2 of their nascent soul elders before they could even hurt him. One had to know that 2 elders from the Xian sect had died in the hands of Zhang Yan. If they continued to fight, how many more would die? Thinking about that, they felt really nervous. It was good to strengthen the sect, but it had to work. If they lost their own lives, then it wouldn't be worth it. To be able to reach the position of an elder in the sect, they had gone through hundreds of years of hard work. They hadn't enjoyed enough blessings, so how could they be in a rush to die? Even if they made great contributions to the sect and could enter the Tao in their next life, who could say that they would have such achievements today? How could Gong Yangsheng not see the selfish and distracting thoughts in their hearts? Although his expression didn't change, he knew that it wasn't good. Although he was the great elder Zhang of the Lai Xian sect, the other elders were considered to be on the same level as him. Although they all had their own selfish motives, he could still use his status as an elder to suppress them. However, once it involved a matter of life and death, it would be wishful thinking to call everyone to risk their lives. If he couldn't come up with a solution, then there was no need to continue fighting. However, after fighting with Zhang Yan a few times, he could tell that apart from himself, if the other four were to fight Zhang Yan alone, it would be good if they could keep their lives. What he was more worried about was that just now, Zhang Yan's step covered 1,000 feet. With such a teleportation ability, he could escape from the battlefield at any time and head elsewhere. He originally thought that with the Jade Rui in hand, he would be able to restrict his sword escape technique. However, from the looks of it, he couldn't trap this person at all. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party's magic treasure had yet to be completely refined, he would have long since left. He did have an item that could restrain this person, but this treasure could not be used lightly, so he hesitated for a moment. Daoist San could see that he was in a difficult position, so he took the initiative to speak up, "Senior Martial Brother. Now that things have come to this, we can only ask for the Ancestral Master's statue." The other three Lai Xian sect elders, the female priest surnamed Tan, Gao Shidi and the bald Taoist, looked at each other. The bald Taoist stood out and said, Shirbua is right. Hurry up and bring out the Patriarch statue." The Lai Xian sect had 2 statues in the ancestral hall. One of them received daily incense and there was nothing special about it. As for the other one, it could condense magic power to temper the divine statue's body. In particular, there was a mental cultivation method in the sect. Every time the members of the sect prayed to the statue of the Patriarch, they had to follow the ritual. It was equivalent to refining this item. After 400 to 500 years, the statue had received the worship of countless people, and now all 8 meridians were opened. The internal organs were already born, and the inside and outside were like a living person. If it was refined for another few hundred years, when this item developed true consciousness, it would merge with the remnant soul that Yi Venerable left behind. It would definitely be able to borrow the body to live and become a sect-protecting treasure. Its power would not be inferior to a Taoist master Dongtian guarding the sect. At that time, if there was the help of a divine beast, the Lai Xian sect would become the #1 sect in Zhongzhou soon. Before they came to attack Zhang Yan, they were afraid that the Zhenluo Union's formation was too strong to break, and they were also afraid that the elders would come back to help after hearing the news. Thus, they brought this treasure just in case. Thus, once the treasure was used, it would definitely consume a lot of vitality. In this way, the final refinement would probably be delayed for another 100 years. They were originally prepared to use it as a last resort, but they didn't expect Zhang Yan to be so difficult to deal with. Thus, they all had the intention to ask for the statue. Seeing that it was difficult to go against the will of the crowd, Gong Yangsheng pondered for a moment and said, "All right, please protect me." Hearing him agree, the 4 of them calmed down and answered. They stood at the 4 corners and protected him. There were 3 layers of restrictions on the statue, and each layer had a different use. However, they believed that even if they could only open 1 layer, it would be more than enough to take down Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed. He could tell that these people were going to use some kind of technique again. However, after circling around a few times, he realized that these people weren't standing randomly on the 4 corners. Instead, they were secretly in a formation, and their defense was tight without any loopholes. He casually sent a few bolts of purple cloud lightning in, and seeing that there was no movement, he knew that this formation was hard to break. He had a thought and decided to retreat. He sat on the cloud to see what they were planning. In less than 5 minutes, Gong Yangsheng, who was standing in the middle of the 4 of them, suddenly shouted. He pushed his hands up and a light cloud floated up. In the cloud, a lifelike statue of Patriarch Iya, who was wearing a gold-threaded sun and moon robe, was brought out. The statue was about 100 feet tall. Once it appeared, celestial music was played and the sound of tens of thousands of worshippers was heard. It emitted thousands of soft and clear lights that shone in all directions. Even the entire Luchi was bathed in the auspicious light. The 5 of them who were standing under the statue felt like it was a good rain, and as the nectar entered their throats, they felt comfortable all over. Their mana surged and it was hard to control, as if it was going to burst out. Gong Yangsheng also felt that his cultivation had increased by a lot. Instantly, he became more spirited and shouted, "Friends, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" He leaped into the air and opened his hand. Lightning flashed in his palm and a bolt of lightning was shot towards Zhang Yan. Daoist Sha and the other 3 did the same. They shouted and raised their hands. They gathered their mana and turned it into a bolt of lightning. Zhang Yan sat on the cloud without moving. The 5-colored light behind him rippled like waves. A blue ray surged out like a broken dam and rushed up, creating a 1,000-feet wave that clashed with the bolt of lightning. In an instant, there was a series of explosions. Although this round of attack was blocked, Gong Yangsheng and the other 4 didn't seem to have the intention to stop. They kept on channeling their mana and shot out bolts of lightning. The force of the water element true light was stopped. One after another, the waves were worn down. The attacks of the 5 of them were slowly closing in on Zhang Yan. Gong Yangsheng's face showed a deep smile. With the help of the statue, their mana was endless and they didn't have to worry about running out. No matter how strong this priest Zhang was, he was only a Yuanying first-level cultivator. How could he defend against their combined attack? Using force to defeat the enemy was the stupidest method. But in this situation, it was the most useful. The position he chose to attack from had a knack. At this moment, if Zhang Yan were to withdraw and dodge, it would not be impossible, but the astral lightning would definitely fall on the earth-fire sinkhole below. Even if there was a restriction protecting this place, without anyone controlling it, it would not be able to last more than a few rounds. If the pit was destroyed, it would be difficult to refine the treasure. Then, all the previous efforts would be in vain. Gong Yangsheng was sure that Zhang Yan wouldn't abandon the treasure. After Daoist Yi Jiliu left, the 5 of them, be it attacking or defending, worked as one. They advanced and retreated in an orderly manner. As a cultivator of the 2nd layer of the nascent soul realm, with 3 strong clouds above his head and the help of the other 4, if he were to face Zhang Yan head-on, he would definitely be able to suppress Zhang Yan. Sure enough, countless bolts of lightning descended like raindrops and exploded out successively, causing the water element true light to shatter into pieces and faintly showing signs of dispersing, and it seemed as if it would be unable to be maintained at any moment. But in such a dangerous situation, Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He continued to sit upright and no change could be seen on his face. At this moment, someone shouted from afar, "Daoist Zhang, don't panic. I am here to help." Zhang Yan turned and saw a person in a Yuanying Dharma body flying over. He couldn't help but smile. "It's Daoist Zhang. Thank you for your help. May I know where Daoist Huang is?" Shang Teng called out from afar, "Daoist Huang is in charge of the seal of the Dao Palace and can't be distracted. Daoist Zhang, don't panic. I have already sent out a letter asking for help. If the 2 of us work together, we just need to hold on for half a day before the elders outside return." Zhang Yan said happily, "If that's the case, Daoist Shang, quickly come and help me." Shang Teng was delighted and hurried over. He had been watching the battle in the Dao Palace. Just now, when he saw Zhang Yan landing below, he had a plan to take advantage of it. He thought that if he could sneak an attack on Zhang Yan, who else in the Xian sect could stand shoulder to shoulder with him other than Gong Yangsheng? However, he was used to being cautious. When he was about to reach Zhang Yan, he stopped. At this moment, Zhang Yan turned around and looked at him. He was slightly surprised and said, "Daoist Huang, why are you here too? Shang Teng's heart shook. He knew that Huang Zuoguang was trapped by him, but he still couldn't help but look back. When he saw that there was nothing behind him, he knew that he had fallen into a trap. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve expressionlessly and a yellow light fell on his head. With a bang, it smashed on the protective treasure light and immediately scattered it. Shang Teng's chest tightened and he vomited blood as he retreated. In a moment of desperation, his vision blurred and he seemed to see a golden light attacking him. He hurriedly used a flying technique and leaped, wanting to escape into the distance. At this moment, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck and his head silently slid down. At this moment, he had already used his escape technique and his headless body suddenly rushed out for hundreds of feet before falling from the sky. What a pity! Gong Yangxing sighed to himself. Regret was written all over his face. It would have been great if he had stepped forward to stop them. Shang Teng was originally a disciple of his master. He had always done his best to do things. If he could successfully obtain the divine beast egg this time, he would be able to take the position of an elder when he returned to the sect. However, he didn't want to die in such a useless way. Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. Did this person really think that he could deceive him? The Lai Xian sect was able to kill their way here without any obstruction. He would never believe that there was no one to help them. Seeing that this person came close, the 5 people from the Lai Xian sect had no intention of stopping him. Their expressions were subtle and he knew that there was something wrong with this person. Moreover, he felt that his relationship with Shang Teng wasn't that good. He actually took the risk of being besieged and came to help. This act was too much. At this moment, the thunder behind him was getting louder and louder. He looked back and saw that the lightning was approaching. The water element true light could no longer withstand it and was already on the verge of collapsing. Under such an impact, even the light on his treasure clothes trembled for a while. Seeing this, he no longer hesitated. He raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A flourishing green light suddenly climbed up. Chapter 463. After the green light appeared, Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and turned around to enter it. He focused on circulating his spiritual power, only to see that the green light continued to grow. It grew taller and taller, giving off an unstoppable aura. The 5 people from Lai Xian sect didn't know how mysterious this light was, but they were afraid of how strong Zhang Yan's technique was. They didn't dare to move forward and could only throw down the lightning in their hands to test its depth. Under the lead of Gong Yangxing, streaks of green lightning exploded in the air, ringing non-stop in the sky, bombarding the wood element true light. However, this light was very strange. Every time a clump was cut down, another clump would grow out. It was like the grass on the plains, there was no end to it and no end to it. The combined efforts of the 5 of them weren't able to stop it from rising. The 5 element true lights each had their own uses. In terms of defending against such continuous attacks, the wood element true light was the best. Moreover, this light was the hardest to control. Once it started, it would grow endlessly. If the spiritual power didn't stop, there would be no end to it. Just at this moment, Zhang Yan seemed to have sensed something and looked down. He sensed a strand of exuberant vitality was surging out from within the pit, and it was like a fledgling that was about to break out of its shell, yet was still a little bit away from being able to emerge into the world because of the final barrier. He couldn't help but feel energized. He didn't need to think much to know that the treasure was about to be refined. If that was the case, as long as he could hold on for a while and wait for the treasure to be born, then once he got his hands on it, he would be able to decide whether to fight or to make peace, to leave or to stay. A moment after Gong Yangsheng and the others attacked. They realized that the pillar of green light didn't weaken at all. Instead, it became even stronger. At the start, the lightning could still make it tremble a little. However, at this moment, it didn't even cause a ripple and couldn't be shaken. Not long after, above the pit of earth fire, there seemed to be a pagoda with a green peak. It was tall and straight, supporting the heavens and the earth, reaching into the clouds. Just by looking at its appearance, he knew that all his efforts were in vain. They couldn't help but look at each other with unsightly expressions. They had paid such a huge price to invite the patriarch's divine statue this time. If they still couldn't do anything to this person, then they wouldn't have a foothold in the sect in the future. Once the news got out, the followers of the cult would certainly lose their morale, and the Qingshi Temple and the Golden Ling sect would certainly come to add insult to injury. At this moment, it was hard for them to back down. Daoist Sha's face darkened. Senior Marshal Brother, if we don't kill this Daoist Zhang today, we won't be able to live peacefully. Why don't we remove the second seal? It was a restrictive spell. It could increase the power of everyone, and if the second restriction was undone, it could activate a talisman that could gather the power of everyone in Lai Xian's sect and activate the power of a magic treasure to the maximum. Gong Yangxing sighed. He nodded and said, "All right." With his permission, Daoist Sha's expression turned serious. He raised his palm and chanted an incantation. In a blink of an eye, a ray of red light flew out from the high cloud above. After shooting for 3 feet, an object leaped out along with the brilliance and arrived outside. As it was blown by the heavenly wind, its originally wrinkled body trembled. It turned out to be a bulging gray cloth sack filled with air. Gong Yangxing turned around and knelt down in front of the patriarch's divine statue. He kowtowed and prayed, "Forgive me, Patriarch." Just now that the horsetail whisk was destroyed by the 5-spirited white carp shuttle, he took out another one from his sleeve and flicked it at the statue. As if it was shedding a layer of clothing, the statue that was originally shining with spiritual light suddenly shone brightly like the sun. It was so blinding that the few people of the same sect behind him couldn't open their eyes. However, Gong Yangxing acted as if nothing had happened. With a respectful expression, he kowtowed to the statue again. He heard a drawn-out chant beside his ear. Smoke came out from the top of the statue. A talisman that looked like a snowflake floated out and slowly landed on his palm. He squeezed it and felt the vast mana within it. He covered his chest and bowed to the statue again. He chanted a "yes" and then used his index and middle fingers to clamp the talisman. He used a secret heart technique and threw it into the bag. The talisman instantly fused with the bag. Daoist Sha's bag was called the Star-Catching Exquisite Bag. It could hold 1,000 liters of sand and water. It was originally a profound weapon. It looked inconspicuous at first and its surface was dark as if it was covered with a layer of gray wax. However, with the help of the talisman, it spun in the air. After a dozen rounds, the filth on it faded away and it emitted a precious light. Daoist Sha pointed with his hand and the bag immediately turned upside down. The mouth of the bag was aimed downwards and it came down on Zhang Yan's head. At the same time, he shouted, "Fellow sect members, help me." When the 4 of them heard this, they immediately activated their magic power. This bag was not small to begin with. Suddenly, it expanded to the size of a mountain. When it was about to fall down, the sky darkened. Looking up, the inside of the bag was pitch black. The bottom could not be seen. It was vast and empty, as if it could contain the entire Luqi mountain. Zhang Yan was always on guard. How would he let it fall? He immediately used the green light around him and went up to meet it. The combined mana of the 5 of them from Lai Xian's sect was far stronger than Zhang Yan alone. They faced it head-on. The bag continued to press down, swallowing the green light bit by bit. However, Zhang Yan wasn't anxious. Based on the current situation, it would take at least an hour to subdue him. At that time, the magical treasure below would have long since emerged, and he would no longer have to worry about anything. He could go all out and fight. Gong Yangxing looked at the battle situation. His eyes flashed. The 3rd cloud above his head fluctuated in size, as if it was about to do something. In each cloud of his, there was a magical weapon. This was for the convenience of nurturing the magical weapon. He had already used the jasper rui and the black iron ruler. In the last cloud of the cloud, the magical weapon was a white wooden hairpin. It was made from the white ebony wood. It was also refined by an expert. It had been nurtured by him for hundreds of years and he had never used it before. He looked around. His eyes darted around. He was looking for the right time to make a move. He raised his hand a few times and put it down again. He had a feeling that if he were to make a move, he would not be able to succeed. He looked around a few more times and his heart moved. He seemed to have noticed the movement below and thought to himself, it seems like the magical weapon is about to be completed. Once it appears, Priest Zhang will definitely be distracted. It won't be too late for me to make a move then. He glanced to his left and right, shooting a glance at his fellow disciples beside him. Then, he stretched out his palm and made a pushing motion, then pointed at the high cloud above his head. He wanted his fellow disciples to work together to restrain Zhang Yan so that he could launch his sneak attack. The four of them knew that he had a magical weapon that he had not used yet. Looking at his actions, they immediately understood. They nodded their heads to show that they understood. Zhang Yan could feel the smoke from the furnace below. He knew that the treasure was right in front of him. However, the closer it was, the more alert he was. His gaze was like a knife and it became colder and sharper. He was very clear that at this critical moment, it was the most important and he could not relax. The moment the magical weapon appeared, the few people from Lai Xian's sect would definitely stop him. They would not allow him to get the treasure easily. Both sides had their own plans. The battle was in a stalemate. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there was a loud rumble from the furnace. It was as if a bolt of lightning had exploded beside their ears. This sound seemed to be able to split the mountains and sink the earth. The mountains reverberated and shook. Even on the twin moon peak that was 500 miles away, everyone's ears were ringing and their heads were swollen. Zhang Yan seemed to be attracted by the sound as he tilted his head slightly to the side. A bright light flashed in his eyes. This was the moment. He pointed his finger, and a white light shot out from the high cloud like an arrow. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, it shot directly towards Zhang Yan. Although Zhang Yan was prepared, he did not expect the item to come so quickly. Just as he was about to activate the light from the treasure robe on his body to block the attack, there was an item at the bottom of the pit that shook and disappeared. In the blink of an eye, it appeared beside Zhang Yan and blocked in front of him. It was the magical weapon that sensed its master was in danger and jumped out to save him. With a "chi" sound, the white wooden hairpin actually pierced through the object in one go. Zhang Yan did not expect that this newly refined magical weapon would have the ability to move through the void. While he was surprised, he couldn't help but feel puzzled. This magical weapon was refined from the remains of a big demon. Even if it was no match for the hairpin, how could it be pierced through? Just as he was puzzled, he suddenly felt a connection in his mind. He couldn't help but be surprised. When he looked at the magical weapon again, he already knew the cause and effect. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. He cupped his hands and said to Gong Yangsheng, "Thank you, fellow cultivator, for helping my magical weapon break through." When Gong Yangsheng heard this, he was puzzled at first. Then, his face suddenly became extremely ugly. It was obvious that he knew what had happened. His body trembled and he felt the blood in his chest churning. He almost spat out blood. When a magical weapon is born, it needs to be pierced through with a needle so that it can breathe in and out spiritual breath, sense warmth and cold, and exchange chi with the heaven and earth. However, it was unknown whether it was because the material used for this magical weapon was too good or some other reason, but its quality was too solid. The two people who were refining the magical weapon were, after all, only at the core transformation level. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the chi aperture and complete this last step. Originally, when Zhang Yan was outside, he could still ask him to help. However, he was fighting with others and had no time to spare. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan were also so anxious that their foreheads were full of sweat. If they missed the time, this magical weapon would not only be a useless treasure, but its quality would also be greatly reduced. It would be a waste of their previous efforts. Just when they were at their wits' end, who would have thought that the magical weapon would automatically fly out to protect its master? Using the white wooden hairpin that Gong Yangsheng used to plot against Zhang Yan, it conveniently opened the spiritual aperture. Once this aperture was opened, this item could sense the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth. It fused with the inside and outside, and in an instant, it became a treasure. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and the magical weapon automatically fell into his palm. Looking at it carefully, it looked like a small and tender golden leaf. It was only the size of a baby's palm. The veins on its whole body were clear, and it was overflowing with colorful lights. It was very delicate and pleasing to the eye. This was the first time this treasure had appeared in the world, and it was dancing with joy. It couldn't wait to send bursts of liveliness to his heart. Zhang Yan smiled slightly. Liang Changgong and Wei Shudan really lived up to their names as grandmasters. He also didn't expect that the moment this item was born, it was already a spiritual profound weapon that contained true consciousness. It could automatically protect its master and block disasters. If it was placed in the aperture points of the body or nurtured in the high cloud, it might be able to give birth to a true spirit in the future and become a true weapon. Chapter 464. This magic treasure was refined using Zhang Yan's own blood essence. Once it was in his hand, he didn't even need to examine it to know its profundity. He pondered for a while, then laughed and said, "So that's how it is. It can be of great use. From today onwards, I'll call you Earth-Splitting Heaven and Earth Leaf. What do you think?" After being given a name, the leaf suddenly trembled and danced in the air. Waves of soft light brushed against his face. Zhang Yan's mind naturally felt a trace of joy coming from it. He smiled and raised his hand to release the treasure, allowing it to float beside him. He looked up and saw that the exquisite bag was still entangled with the wood element true light. Now that the restriction was gone, he had nothing to worry about. He could use his fists and legs to fight with this group of people. With a clear whistle like a crane's cry and a dragon's roar, he flung his sleeves and stepped on the clouds. He used the minor universe teleportation and instantly crossed a distance of hundreds of feet, arriving in front of the 5 people. The earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf also followed him like a shadow. After a flash, it caught up with him. Behind him, a blue light flashed and a huge wave surged. Gong Yangsheng and the rest were shocked. They had seen the power of this true light before. They hurriedly retracted their mana from the Ling Long pouch and used their magical weapons in the air. Fortunately, they were able to protect themselves in time. Although the waves were crashing towards them continuously, the 5 of them were like rocks in the sea, standing upright and unmoving. Zhang Yan didn't create such a scene in hopes of injuring the enemy. He only wanted to restrain the hands and feet of the 5 people. Seeing that his goal was achieved, he urged the earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf immediately responded and flew forward like a leaf. The bald Taoist was the first to bear the brunt. When he saw the treasure flying towards him, his face slightly changed. He thought that this magic treasure was not simple, so he carefully took a defensive position. He held a lightning branch in his hand and pushed it up, wanting to stop it. When the heaven and earth leaf was within 5 zhang in front of him, it suddenly trembled, and a faint golden wave poured down like a hanging curtain, separating the 4 directions from above and below. It trapped him inside. With a faint smile, Zhang Yan also stepped inside and his figure abruptly disappeared. Seeing that the light barrier was strange, Gong Yangsheng could not help but frown. With a wave of his hand, a bolt of lightning shot out. The 3 people behind him also reacted and hurriedly exerted their strength to attack together. Bolts of lightning struck down. It crashed into the golden curtain of light, but it only shook slightly, unable to break. Once the bald Taoist was covered, he looked around and saw that none of his fellow disciples were there. He couldn't help but panic. Suddenly, he saw Zhang Yan also stride in. Without saying a word to him, he casually waved his hand, and a purple light flashed, and a bolt of divine lightning struck out. The bald Taoist was frightened out of his wits. Without the help of the others, how could he resist such an overbearing divine ability by himself? The treasured light on his body was instantly shattered, and he was blasted backwards by the aftershock of the attack. Before he could fall to the ground, a golden light flew over. He was chopped into two, and his soul was destroyed. Once this magic treasure covered a person, it could trap them inside. If one didn't have a way to deal with it, they could only be trapped inside, unable to escape. Although they could still use their magic treasures and divine abilities in this space, the reason why Zhang Yan didn't come down to deal with them was because the 5 of them attacked and defended as one. It was really difficult to deal with them. Now that the heaven and earth leaf separated them, it gave him a chance to deal with them one by one. After dealing with this person, Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, and a blue light kept the corpse. Then, he turned around and walked out of the light barrier. When Gong Yangsheng and the others saw that he suddenly appeared, and the bald Taoist was nowhere to be seen, how could they not know what was going on? They all felt a chill down their spines. Zhang Yan's sharp gaze swept across and landed on Taoist Gao. The heaven and earth leaf on top of his head felt his thoughts, and swayed rhythmically, turning around and flying towards him. Taoist Gao couldn't help but feel shocked, and hurriedly used his escape technique. A ray of light appeared under his feet, and brought him over 100 feet away. However, the heaven and earth leaf was hot on his heels. It stretched and unfolded in the air, and it already had the ability to shift. In the blink of an eye, it caught up to the top of his head, and a golden curtain of light fell down, trapping him inside. Zhang Yan walked in expressionlessly, and within a few breaths, he killed him. He walked out alone again, and turned to look at the female Taoist surnamed Tan. Fear appeared on the female Taoist surnamed Tan's face, and she cried out in surprise, wanting to retreat. However, how could she be faster than the heaven and earth leaf? The leaf was 50 feet away, and it released a golden light that was shaped like an inverted funnel, and it also enveloped her. When Gong Yangxing saw that Zhang Yan had trapped another one of them, he was shocked and angry, and shouted, "Don't even think about it." He raised the iron ruler in his hand, and that Taoist Sha used the gold and white flying balls to attack him. Zhang Yan chuckled, and said, "There's no hurry." With a wave of his big sleeve, 2 rays of light flew out. The longevity-locking sun cicada flew out to stop the iron ruler, and the 5-spirit white carp shuttle went forward to knock away the flying balls, while he strolled into the light curtain. Gong Yangsheng and Taoist Sha saw that they couldn't stop Zhang Yan at all, and their hearts sank. The female Taoist surnamed Tan was trapped by the heaven and earth leaf, and she was at a loss of what to do. As soon as she saw Zhang Yan, tears and snot flowed down, and she knelt down, and said, "Taoist Zhang, spare my life, I'm willing to be your slave." Zhang Yan saw that her hands were hidden in her sleeves, and it was obvious that she was secretly holding onto a talisman. He couldn't help but laugh coldly, and with a wave of his sleeve, 365 drops of serene heavy water came down like hail rain. The female Taoist surnamed Tan was already prepared, and the talisman in her hand was raised in the air, and she tried to block it with all her might. But even so, she could only hold on for a moment, and under the overwhelming attack, her bones were broken, and her body and spirit were destroyed. At this moment, outside, Taoist Sha grabbed the sleeve of Gong Yangsheng, who was beside him, and said in panic, "Senior apprentice brother, we can't do this, why don't we leave quickly?" Gong Yangsheng looked at him, and said, "Leave? Go where?" Taoist Sha couldn't help but be stunned. In his heart, he understood that for today's battle, Lai Xian's sect had turned out in full force, and now that the elites were all dead, it would be difficult for them to stand in Zhongzhou in the future. He only had about 100 years of life left, even if he returned to the sect, what was the use? Gong Yangsheng shook his sleeve, and shook off his hand, and said coldly, "That Taoist Zhang's art of teleportation is amazing, even if he wants to leave, how can he leave? Why don't we give it our all here, and maybe we still have a chance of survival." I want to remove the third seal of the ancestor statue, junior apprentice brother. You try to delay for a while. If you can protect your soul, I will personally send you to reincarnate. Daoist Sha knew that he had no other choice, so he closed his eyes, and smiled sadly, and said, I will definitely try to delay. I only hope that senior apprentice brother will not forget your promise. He reached into his sleeve pocket, and took out a bottle of elixir. He looked at it, and in the end, a determined look appeared on his face, and he pulled out the bottle stopper, and poured all the elixir into his mouth. This elixir was a secret of Lai Xian's sect. Even if his status in Lai Xian's sect was not low, he only had about 10 of them, and usually, just one would be enough to boost his mana. Now that he swallowed all of them, he no longer cared about his own life. After a while, he snorted, and the third cloud that was originally faintly visible above his head suddenly spun faster, and gradually solidified. Although it had not reached the second layer, but the strength of the mana had already climbed to the limit that he could maintain. At this moment, the golden light faded. Zhang Yan appeared again. Daoist Sha's eyes were bloodshot, and he looked at him fiercely. Suddenly, he shouted, and pointed to the sky, and a ray of light rushed out from his back. Among the cloud light, a jade hook that was as white as snow appeared, and he used it to slash at him. Seeing that he used this jade hook, Gong Yangxing knew that he was going to risk his life. He hurriedly retreated a few steps, and went to the side of the ancestor statue. At this moment, his life was more important, and he couldn't care about the complicated etiquette anymore. He pinched out 3 talismans with 2 fingers, and placed them on his forehead, his chest, and his abdomen. Then, he took out 3 celestial incense sticks, and held them in front of him with both hands, and he muttered. Daoist Sha understood that if he ran now, he would only die faster, so he might as well throw life and death aside, and fight for his life. The third seal would take a lot of effort, and even if he couldn't win, he could still buy a few breaths of time for Gong Yangsheng. Zhang Yan looked at the jade hook coming over. With a shake of his hand, he sent out a ray of purple heaven thunder to meet it. If it was a normal talisman, after being struck by his thunder, it would definitely be damaged, and at least it would be able to block for a while. However, this jade hook seemed to be unharmed, and it continued to slash down. At this moment, the heaven and earth leaf suddenly appeared in front of him, and on the surface of the leaf burst out balls of auspicious light and spiritual clouds. It was clear and bright, and it could only linger in the air, unable to find a path to descend. Zhang Yan took a step forward, and a ray of blue light shot out towards the hook, wanting to collect it. However, this hook was very ferocious, it slashed left and right, and actually got rid of the entanglement of the water element true light in a few moves. It let out another sharp whistle, and turned into a ray of white light, and flew behind Zhang Yan, slashing down again. Zhang Yan sneered, and simply ignored it. He made a hand sign, and the yuanying on top of his head shook, and layers of protective treasure light were released. This light was like the heavenly thunder, and it was condensed by the cultivator's mana. However, some cultivators were not from the orthodox path, and the treasure light was weak, and it was not enough to protect themselves, so they would collect the heavenly evil spirit and refine it within to increase its power. Zhang Yan's mana was vigorous, and the method he practiced was orthodox, so it was not difficult for him to block it for a while. Even if he managed to slash in, he had the treasure to block it, so he did not care about it at all. He only controlled the heaven and earth leaf to cover Daoist sand, and a ray of golden light surrounded him. He himself also rolled up his sleeves, and jumped inside. At the same time, the incense in Gong Yangxing's hand had burned down more than half. He waited for a while, and seeing that there was only a little left, he impatiently took down the 3 talismans, and used his strength to slap between the eyebrows of the statue. However, after doing all this, he saw that the ancestor statue did not move, and his heart sank. This statue had broken 2 seals consecutively, and it had used up a lot of energy. If he wanted to break the 3rd seal, he was afraid that he would not be able to do it in a short period of time. But at this moment, he suddenly heard a noise behind him. He turned around to look, and it turned out that the spiritual light of the jade hook had dissipated, and it fell from midair. His heart skipped a beat, and he knew that Taoist Sand had most likely lost his life. Seeing that Zhang Yan was about to come out, but the statue still did not move, cold sweat dripped down his head, and the expression on his face kept changing. It was obvious that he was having a fierce struggle in his heart. In the end, he made up his mind, and his body shook, shaking off the 2 clouds above his head. He stretched out his hand, and controlled them to go under the nose aperture of the statue, and disappeared. Getting rid of the 3 clouds was equivalent to dispersing half of his cultivation. His skin and flesh withered, and in an instant, he aged 100 years. He took a deep breath, and managed to stand firm. Then, he stared at the statue, and waited for any changes. After a while, the body of the statue suddenly emitted a majestic aura. The statue's eyes were originally closed, but then the eyelids trembled, and suddenly opened, releasing 2 rays of burning light. The expression on its face also became incomparably vivid. Then, the body of the statue shook, and this 10 feet tall statue, like a human, stood up. Its eyes looked down, and with a rumbling voice, he shouted, "Unfilial Junior, you obviously haven't achieved enough, why did you call me out?" Chapter 465. The statue's voice was like thunder, spreading across the sky, and it was filled with majesty. Gong Yangsheng immediately knelt down and walked a few steps on the cloud. He kowtowed and said in a choked voice, "Your disciple has been rude and alarmed the patriarch. However, our Lai Xian sect is in danger and is about to be overturned. Your disciple has no choice but to ask the patriarch to come out and help us get rid of this great enemy." After saying that, he kowtowed many times. The statue gave out a long nasal sound and said, "Why are you the only one here out of the 9 elders? I don't see the other elders coming to welcome you." He pointed at Zhang Yan and said, "It isn't that disciple is disrespectful to ancestor, but I really can't. Apart from me, the rest were all killed by this person." The statue's sharp gaze swept towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change, but he was shocked deep down. He didn't expect Gong Yangsheng to do such a thing. With his eyesight, he couldn't see through the statue. It was obvious that this thing wasn't simple and it wasn't easy to deal with. However, he had already gotten the treasure and his goal was achieved. He could leave at any time, and if there wasn't a need, he didn't need to fight. The statue of God stared at Zhang Yan for a moment before speaking to Gong Yangsheng in a deep voice, "You step back and watch me eliminate this great enemy." Gong Yangsheng relaxed and kowtowed once more before retreating to the side. His actions were half real and half fake. It was true that he was begging the statue to save him, but it might not be true that he was respectful. This statue could be said to be Venerable Iya, but it could also be said that it wasn't. For hundreds of years, who knew how many Lai Xian sect disciples worshipped it? After the ritual, the statue had already formed a true consciousness. However, it only knew that it was Venerable Iya, the ancestor of Lai Xian sect. However, it didn't know that it was a fake created by the disciples. If it could be refined for hundreds or thousands of years and form a true spirit, then it could merge with the remnant soul that Venerable Iya left in the past to complete the soul. Then, it could barely be considered as borrowing a body to live. However, even then, it wasn't the original. Right now, because of the great enemy in front of him, Gong Yangsheng had no choice but to merge this wisp of his ancestor's remnant soul with his true sense in advance. Due to the lack of experience, this statue could only be considered a half-broken true artifact. It had already completely cut off its future path. However, from the way he saw it, other than himself, the other elders were all dead. If even the Lai Xian sect could not protect it, how could they possibly continue refining this treasure? It was better to break the seal as soon as possible and escape with his life. With the help of this treasure, he would at least have something to rely on while he was still alive. The statue looked at Zhang Yan and shouted, "I don't care which sect you are from. Killing an elder of my sect is a crime that cannot be punished. Hand over your life." He clenched his fist, and a flash of lightning appeared in the void. Then, a bolt of lightning exploded. It came from the sky. Zhang Yan took a step back and swiftly executed the minor universe-shifting escape art. His figure only swayed from his original spot for a moment before he was already 1,000 feet away. At this moment, he turned his head and saw that the lightning fell from the sky and struck Luqi Mountain. He only heard a shocking sound. The mountain rocks cracked and grass and trees flew. Even the top of the mountain was blown away. He was slightly shocked. He didn't think that the attack of this statue would be so powerful. Although this ancestor Iya statue only used the lightning to fight the enemy, he was using the body of the treasure to attack. It could be said that his mana was monstrous. The power that he displayed was more than 10 times stronger than the few elders of the Lai Xian sect. The statue saw that in the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan had escaped into the distance. He laughed coldly and said, "Shifting art. You dare to show off in front of me?" His giant body shook slightly and suddenly, a golden bridge appeared beneath his feet. He took a step forward and his giant body flashed and blocked in front of Zhang Yan. Then, he pointed downwards and there was a strong gust of wind that swept over. Within a radius of 10 miles, the wind and clouds changed color and everything was shrouded in a storm. Zhang Yan's eyes turned cold. He naturally wouldn't wait for death. He raised his hand and a few bolts of purple lightning shot out. However, when they hit the statue, there was only a rumble and no damage was done. It was as if the statue didn't feel anything. The statue laughed coldly and stood on the spot. His body actually shrunk continuously and turned into the size of a normal person. He straightened his palm and began to chant an incantation. His voice was loud and filled the sky with the sound of chanting. In the blink of an eye, circles of dazzling brilliance shot out like silver stars and surged like torches. They ceaselessly spread out from his body and illuminated his face. In the end, a brilliance that was like the rising sun suddenly soared up from his back, and it covered the heavens and the earth as it enveloped down and completely enveloped this area of the world. He flicked his sleeves coldly and said, "Junior, I have now locked this area. Let's see where you can escape to." Gong Yangsheng, who was watching at the side, had a strange light in his eyes. He secretly rejoiced and said, "I originally thought that if the seal was released in advance, this treasure would be somewhat useful, but it wouldn't be that powerful. I didn't expect that it would have such power even before it was refined. With its help, why would we be afraid of Qingshi Temple and Jinling sect? In a few hundred years, we can make a comeback again." The statue raised his hand and bolts of strong lightning fell again. However, this time it wasn't a test like before. Instead, dozens of bolts of lightning blasted from all directions, leaving no room for Zhang Yan to dodge at all. Since he couldn't dodge, he might as well not dodge. Zhang Yan shouted loudly as he summoned the world leaf over, causing it to float above his head, and then he circulated his magic energy to the limit. This leaf seemed to know that this was a critical moment as well, and it emitted a clear cry that was like the sound of a zither that spread out into the distance. A brilliant brilliance that was dazzling like a brocade cloud and soft like a rosy cloud bloomed from its body, and it protected him within it. The strong lightning fell like dense rain hitting the long water, causing ripples to appear continuously. This shell leaf was like a small boat crossing the sea. It seemed to be swaying in the storm and seemed to be about to capsize at any time. However, it was very tough and it was difficult to break through. This statue relied on its huge mana and could trigger such a great momentum at any time. However, it was after all not mature enough and it was incomplete. In essence, it was only similar to a cultivator of the 3rd level of Yuanying. If it wanted to rely on its own strength to break this earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf, it would be difficult to do so in a short period of time. Seeing that no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't take down Zhang Yan, the statue seemed to be annoyed. It snorted and said, "Junior, do you think that this is all I have? Take a good look." He stretched out his hand and a green aura appeared out of thin air. He pinched it a few times and with a flick of his finger, a flag that was condensed from smoke flew out. He then turned his head and pointed at Zhang Yan and said, "Keep." In an instant, Zhang Yan only felt that his body was being pulled by a huge force and was slowly being dragged up. Even the heaven and earth leaf could not stop it. He raised his head and looked up. Judging from the momentum, it seemed that in less than the time it took for an incense stick to burn, he would be pulled onto the flag. Although he didn't know what the secret was, he knew that it would not go as he wished. He thought for a while and took out an item from his sleeve. He looked at it and thought, I originally didn't want to use this item to avoid leaving any traces. But now it seems that this is the only thing that can solve the problem once and for all. Jinren Cheng predicted the enemy first. This is a good move. The item in his hand was a black wood talisman. It was given to him by Jinren Cheng before he left. This wasn't a rare magical treasure, it was the talisman of the restriction within 800 miles of the Double Moon Peak. With this talisman, one could activate the Zhenluo Alliance's protective formation and kill the enemy. Even if the people from the Heaven's Abode came, they would be able to resist for a while. Because of this, the range of the formation was very wide. Usually, 3 Jinren Yuanying would need to work together to activate it. That was why there were 3 elders of the Zhenluo Alliance guarding the Double Moon Peak all year round. Before the Lai Xian sect attacked, they were also afraid of this formation. They thought of ways to get Elder Che away and ordered Shang Teng to take down Huang Zuoguang. If it wasn't for this, no matter how brave they were, they wouldn't have dared to come here. What they didn't expect was that although Jinren Cheng couldn't protect the Zhenluo Alliance due to the battle, he gave the talisman to Zhang Yan before he left, leaving a hidden chess piece. When the 9 people from the Lai Xian sect attacked, if Zhang Yan used this talisman, he could easily kill them. However, this kind of formation was the foundation of a sect. If he used it as an outsider, it would be a taboo. Secondly, with his own strength, he wouldn't be able to activate the formation. He needed the help of the earth-fire heavenly furnace. But at that time, his heaven and earth leaf was still being refined in the furnace. Once he used this talisman, he wouldn't be able to refine the treasure. This was why Jinren Cheng said that it might be useful when the treasure is completed. The situation was dire. This statue was made of precious materials and didn't fear any weapons. Even if the Shaoqing sect's extreme sword technique was said to be able to cut through anything, if it wasn't trained to a certain level, it might not be able to cut through this item. With Zhang Yan's current abilities, if he wanted to break out of this predicament, he could only use the North Dark Sword. However, that wasn't worth it. Thus, activating the formation was the most suitable choice. As for how to negotiate with the Zhenluo Alliance, that was a matter for the future. There was no need to think about it now. He held on to the talisman and poured all the magic power in his body into it. The talisman suddenly vibrated, and in an instant, countless chants and secret techniques were transmitted into his mind. This was a method to control the restrictive formation. If it was someone who didn't know anything about formations, even if he learned this method, he would only be able to slowly test it out. If he came, he would be able to scare away the statue, but if he wanted to capture it, he wouldn't be able to. Fortunately, when Zhang Yan was on the continent of Kunyu, he had roughly studied the formation in order to absorb Gangying. He knew how to operate it. Now that he had the chance in hand, he didn't dare to say that he could completely control the formation, but it was enough to trap this enemy. He held the talisman and was about to make his move when he suddenly stopped. He thought of something and looked down. He thought to himself, there are still 3 Taoists in the pit. Just now, they haven't escaped. They must have seen the elders of Lai Xian sect and didn't dare to come out. If I use the pit to activate the formation, I'm afraid their lives will be in danger. Daoist Hua, let's not talk about him. Liang and Wei have worked hard for me, I can't harm their lives. His mind moved and he immediately had an idea. His mind moved and the Qian Kun leaf on top of his head suddenly swayed, as if it was reluctant to part. It spun a few times above his head and fell into the pit of earth fire to protect the 3 people. He took out a spell and the treasure light on his body released a few feet of light to protect himself. He then took out the fixing talisman and activated the formation with his spiritual power. Chapter 466. The mountains collapsed and the rivers and mountains shook. Zhang Yan opened up the 800 miles formation and immediately triggered the wind, thunder, water and fire. The whole formation started to revolve with the furnace as the main pivot. In the blink of an eye, the clouds covered the sun and the wind and rain gathered. The heaven and earth changed color. Countless lightning danced like silver snakes and wreaked havoc in the sky. The might of this restrictive formation wasn't something that a single person could resist. Yi's statue noticed that something was off as well, and its expression changed abruptly. How could it still care about capturing Zhang Yan? It grabbed Gong Yangsheng's collar and shouted at the same time, "Go!" He took a quick step and a rainbow light appeared under his feet. The golden bridge of life flew out and carried the two of them towards the clouds. As long as they broke through the strong current and went to the top of the sky before the formation was fully activated, they would still be able to escape. Zhang Yan saw everything clearly from behind. How could he let him escape? If he let this person go, who knows how many troubles there would be in the future. With a clear chant, he executed the minor universe-shifting escape art. In a split second, his body turned into a stream of light as he chased after it. With a point of his hand, the 5 spirits white carp shuttle and the longevity-locking cicada flew out at the same time. Yi's statue felt the movement behind him and snorted. He turned around and waved his sleeves, slapping the 5 spirits white carp shuttle away. But at this moment, the longevity-locking sun cicada got the chance. It waved its head and tail and leaped into the sky. It landed on his forehead and suddenly froze his body, making him unable to move. If it was a normal magic treasure, as long as Zhang Yan did not take back the longevity-locking sun cicada, it would not be able to show off its power. But Yi's statue was different. After a few breaths, he snorted. His body shook and he tried to break free. But in this short time, he had already lost the chance to escape. Zhang Yan smiled and shook the token in his hand. As the formation rotated, he retreated in time. A formation door appeared above the clouds. It was like the sky had split open and countless metal wind and fire poured down from it. Yi shouted loudly, rolling up his sleeves to cover his face. The strange light on his body rose up like a miasma, taking the form of a spiritual cloud, shrouding his body within. However, the golden fire in the formation was extremely fierce, and his body was also scratched by it. Not long after, like a gale sweeping leaves, he was wrapped up in it. He might as well not use this body of a cultivator. It was abnormally sturdy and could not be broken in an instant. However, he was only concerned about himself at the moment and neglected Gong Yangsheng who was beside him. The great elder of the Lai Xian sect had previously cut off 2 astral clouds. He seemed to be fine, but in reality, his vitality had already been greatly injured. At this moment, being grabbed by Yi and being shaken left and right, he was already dizzy. He originally thought that with the protection of this statue, there was no need for him to worry. Who would have thought that there would be such an unforeseen event? It was already too late for him to take out his magic treasures. Countless metal winds blew over, and he only managed to spin around his body a few times. After a few miserable screams, his flesh and bones were turned into mud. When Yi came back to his senses, he saw that there was only an incomplete Taoist robe left in his hand. He couldn't help but be stunned. Once a flesh and blood body landed in the formation, needless to say, one would definitely die. However, once this person left, from today onwards, none of the Lai Xian sect's elders would be left in the world. Now that he had intelligence, he treated himself as Yi himself. He couldn't even protect the disciples in the sect. Sadness rose up in his heart. However, in the blink of an eye, he suppressed these emotions. He tossed the robe aside and a fierce expression appeared on his face. He pulled himself up and charged upwards. He waved his hands and shot out numerous lightning bolts, like he wasn't willing to be trapped in this place and wanted to charge out. At this moment, he still had a sliver of hope in his heart. As long as he could return to Pingdong, even if Lai Xian's sect only had him left, he could still have a foothold in the world. At most, he would use a few hundred years to nurture a few more people. However, under Zhang Yan's activation, what he had to face now wasn't just one formation door. There were hundreds of them stacked on top of each other. These formation doors unleashed their power at the same time. In an instant, countless lightning bolts surged towards him. Even he couldn't defend against them. In just a moment, the protective treasure light shattered. He was hit by hundreds of lightning bolts and fell from the sky, landing in the pit of earth fire. At this moment, the formation door in the clouds rumbled and closed, completely suppressing him. Zhang Yan circled around in the air. Seeing that the statue had no chance of breaking free, he kept the formation token. At this moment, he glanced around and saw that there was an item on the ground. It was dazzling and the spiritual qi was pressing. He shook his sleeve and a ray of water light sucked it up. Holding it in his hand, he saw that it was Gong Yangsheng's jade rui. He thought for a moment and kept it in his bag. But at this moment, he didn't realize that at the foot of Lu Qi Mountain, there was a white wooden hairpin that jumped up from the ground. Then, it drilled into the mud and traveled for a few miles underground. Suddenly, it hit something. Then, a spirit floated up from the hairpin. Looking at its appearance, it was Lai Xian's sect's great elder Gong Yangsheng. At the critical moment just now, he took the opportunity to escape and hid his soul in the white wooden hairpin. Relying on the sturdiness of this item, he escaped with all his might. That was how he managed to escape and avoid the fate of having his soul destroyed. It was just that when he was escaping in a panic, he accidentally sensed that there was a suitable place to store his spirit. That was why he took the risk and rushed over. Now that he looked at it, it was a statue of the patriarch that he didn't know when it was buried underground. Instantly, his face revealed a look of surprise and he couldn't wait to burrow in. Then, he hid his breath and waited for the opportunity to escape. This statue of the patriarch was originally buried by Shang Teng in advance. It was originally for him to escape if things went wrong. But before he could use it, he was killed by Zhang Yan. Now, it was used by Gong Yangsheng as a hiding place. However, Gong Yangsheng wasn't a disciple of the devil's sect. Even if the statue of the patriarch resided in his spirit, he could at most stay in it for a few years. It was impossible for him to recover his previous cultivation. If he didn't find a suitable body to possess in time or reincarnate, he would inevitably die in the end. Zhang Yan stepped on the cloud and slowly floated down from the sky. He came to a cave made of rocks and said, "Are the three of you here? The enemy has been eliminated, you can come out with peace of mind." After a while, Liang Changgong, Wei Shudan, and Hua Zhaofang carefully walked out of the cave. At this moment, they looked at Zhang Yan with eyes full of respect. When the 7 elders of the Xian sect appeared, they originally thought that Zhang Yan wouldn't be able to survive. But who would have thought that after a battle, Zhang Yan would actually display his divine might? He fought against 7 enemies by himself and killed all of them. It seemed that with the strength of a single person, he could annihilate a sect. Anyone who saw it would inevitably feel fear in their heart. The 3 of them trembled as they walked forward and cupped their hands. Liang Changgong even said, "Thank you for saving us just now, Daoist Zhang." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The 3 of you have refined a Xian artifact for I haven't thanked you yet, so how can I sit back and do nothing?" He paused for a moment and said, "Just now, I borrowed your sect's formation to suppress the person who claimed to be the Xian sect's patriarch. But it won't be easy to get rid of him. I think I will have to spend some effort and wait for your elders to come before making a decision." After using the Zhenluo Union's forbidden formation to defeat the enemy, he first mentioned this to prevent any more unnecessary trouble. As for how he managed to control the forbidden formation, if the Zhenluo Union's elders asked, he would naturally tell them. But now, there was no need to explain it to them. Hua Xiaofang's eyes lit up and she asked anxiously, Daoist Zhang is saying that the Xian sect's patriarch is suppressed in this pit of earth fire. Although they clearly saw the battle between Zhang Yan and the Seven, but after the forbidden formation was activated, the three of them were covered by the heaven and earth leaf's golden light, so they didn't know what happened in the end. Zhang Yan nodded and said, that's right. I don't know where this thing came from, but it's extremely powerful, almost comparable to a third Yuanying cultivator. If we don't rely on the formation, it will be hard to deal with. However, Hua Xiaofang's expression became excited and she said, Daoren has long heard of this thing. It should be made from the combination of tricolored yin-yang sand and 5-drum stem star wood, especially the separation and reunion essence fire. If this thing is in the pit of earth fire and Daoist Zhang wants to get rid of it, you don't have to use the forbidden formation to suppress it. You can find a way to refine it, and if you supplement it with precious materials, you might be able to make a few more talismans. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised and said, it can be done like this? Liang and Wei Changgong lowered their heads and thought. They were both experts in this field, but they didn't think about it before. Now that they thought about it, they were immediately moved. Liang Changgong said in a low voice, although what fellow Hua said seems to be a brilliant idea, it might be possible. Wei Shudan also nodded in agreement and said, there is some possibility, we can try. However, this thing is a living thing. When we refine it, it will definitely struggle. Our cultivation is low, so we can't suppress it. If we have the help of the talisman in Daoist Zhang's hands, then there's nothing to worry about. The three of them couldn't help but look at Zhang Yan. The precious materials used on this Yi statue were extremely rare. As experts in refining, they were also itching to try it. This was not like the black tortoise shell from before, where they constantly had to worry about not being able to explain if they broke it. Zhang Yan thought for a while. If he borrowed the treasure, then he would definitely have to stay here for a long time. However, he had the help of the formation talisman today, so he faintly felt that there was something unfinished. It wasn't the time to leave yet, so he smiled and said, what's so difficult about it? If this thing isn't removed, it will be a problem in the future. You can borrow the heaven and earth leaf for now. He raised his hand, and the heaven and earth leaf flew out from his sleeve and landed in Liang Changgong's hand. The three of them were overjoyed. According to their thoughts, if they refined the Yi statue, even though it couldn't compare to the heaven and earth leaf in Zhang Yan's hand, it wouldn't be much worse. Liang Changgong bowed heavily to Zhang Yan and said, thank you, Daoist Zhang. If you manage to refine any talisman, we will definitely offer it to you with both hands. We don't dare to take it. Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, there's no need for that. From what you said, this thing can be refined into several talismans. If that's the case, when the treasure is refined, the three of you can choose one for yourselves. These few people had refined treasures for him for several years, and they could be said to have done their best. Moreover, they really had real skills. Even if their lifespans came to an end, the disciples under them wouldn't necessarily be bad. There would be many opportunities to interact with this sect, so there was no harm in selling them a favor. When the three of them heard that, they were also a little tempted. But they didn't dare to rashly accept Zhang Yan's gift of a talisman. After rejecting it for a while, seeing that he was really sincere, they were relieved and thanked him together. At this moment, 5 rays of auspicious light flew over from the horizon and landed on Mount Luqi. The one in front was a tall and handsome cultivator in a purple robe. He looked up and swept his gaze across, and his sharp gaze suddenly landed on Zhang Yan. He shouted, who dares to trespass my twin moon peak? State your name. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.